All right. Hello, hello. Video or no video? Oh,
I I'm gonna do
oh
video.
gosh, I can't hear you. 1 second.
Oh, sorry. You can probably hear me now.
Yeah, I can. 1 second. All right. Oh, not sharing my screen, just turning my camera on. Sick.
Whoa, the man of the hour,
Hello. Yeah,
Hanz Harkir.
are
Hello.
those weights behind you? You've been working out?
No, they're not mine.
Oh,
I was using them to like hold things down. But someone
okay.
brought them over. Would
Oh,
be
okay.
cool though. Maybe I should start pumping big iron.
I think like all right, like nothing wrong with that. I love it when people lift weights, right? I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do. I'm always in favor of lifting weights. You just
Yeah.
feel better, or just like general exercise. Like some people get turned off by the idea of like either like lifting because they don't want to either like get bulky or anything. But honestly, the best that most people can do is just basic cardio exercise and like maybe body weight stuff because you don't have to be super big, but it helps your long term quality of life if you just do cardio a couple times a week. So I've been trying to get back into that because I got kind of fat when I was on my vacation. I gained about 10 pounds, and it was in 2 weeks. So
Just
I've
get the
been
heart rate
working.
up, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
just so especially like, as a heavier guy, it's kind of important for me. And I've already like talked to people about this where I'm probably gonna start slimming down in my 40s just because maintaining a certain degree of size, even if it's like mostly muscle, over a long period of time just makes you die faster. And I don't want to like leave whatever person I end up like living my life with. I don't want to leave them in my early 60s because I was like I want to stay 250 as an old man. It's just not worth it. So.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really interesting is how like a lot of people push being healthy to like just insane levels where it's clearly not benefiting them. Like it's
Oh yeah.
really impressive to see like the crazy physical transformations like gym guys will go for. But also like you just know that it's like so unhealthy, especially the people who like are on like trend cycles and whatnot. And are
Oh yeah.
not super adept in endocrinology, so they're just like shooting up as much as they can.
As someone who like has some experience with hormones, have you ever like talked to a gym guy on roids about like their steroid cycles or their hormone cycles?
Personally, no. But yeah, I've fallen into a few like rabbit holes on YouTube, just like watching content from these people. So that's like
Mhm.
my experience.
Do you watch the that more plates more dates guy? He's like the one I watch mostly for like steroid stuff.
I've
Just
watched him a little bit just because like I know people who really like him, and they'll
mhm.
be like, "Look at this video."
Yeah. So all right. So the main topic are you so actually where are you in the boys? So I know you saw Blue Hawk. Are you caught up?
I caught up, yeah,
Oh, thank you.
yeah.
Um, What do you how you feeling about episode 6? All right, spoiler. Also, everyone, spoilers for the boys. Where are we talking mostly about media and different portrayals of conservatism versus leftism and like different types of media. But I want to pick your brain about the boys because I think we disagreed about Blue Hawk, and I think that'd be like a really cool place to start. So spoilers for the boys up until season 3, episode 6 for anyone listening.
Yeah, so like my problem is that so much of media just seems like so intensely progressive, and it's the point where like it's very clear that the writers are like progressives themselves, and they're writing with the expectation of a progressive audience. And so the need to actually have like nuance in the portrayal of these ideas just goes completely out the window. And I think that Blue Hawk's like a good example of this because he just like sort of goes crazy in like a town hall and just starts like throwing black people into the wall. And the satire like actually could have been good and like was kind of interesting up until that point where like a lot of the things he says are like, yeah, like I've heard these things said by people before. And
Like
he
basic
just,
boomer stuff where you're like,
yeah, they just come off as like sort of like boomer defenses of like boomer positions on policing issues, where it's like they're not totally like nuanced or like well spoken, but like they make sense for the character, and like some people do say these things, so it's like, yeah, that's believable. Um, but then they have to do like the thing, which is like the God's not dead thing of like the atheists in God's not dead are not just like atheists with bad arguments. of which there are many atheists with bad arguments. They're like cartoonishly evil atheists who
Right.
would do things like throwing people into walls over like the slightest provocation.
So I guess if we could like rewrite that scene, what would you prefer to have been, say, like the Blue Hawk and A Train storyline? Because I think uh, I can understand where that'd be frustrating, but I would say overall, I would actually, I want to get your opinion on this. I think The Boys does a really good job of dissecting a lot of progressive like messaging or arguments or characters, and still portraying them as either more complicated or negative. I think Adrian's a really good example where he's like I say, a star athlete, but he's also a drug addict and a murderer, and he cynically tries to weaponize either his status or other things like that to get ahead.
And to
And the same
push a
thing
progressive message, right?
I would for him. I don't think it's so much pushing a progressive message as
But like
getting.
cynically he does this, right?
Oh
He
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
buys into sort of things.
Right,
Which
and
I think
so
is true. But yeah, continue.
so I guess the frustration then is right is that there's a cynical portrayal of both conservatism and progressivism in good shows, right? Now it's like some shows obviously are just like super like balls to wall, everything lefty, right? There's definitely shows like that, but I'd say The Boys can demonstrate both of those relatively well, right?
I disagree.
Oh,
And
you disagree that they can dissect both of them? Okay.
yeah, because like look at the boys and what exactly is being satirized when you have like the fake sort of like in-universe Pepsi commercial where he's like handing it to the writers, or what's being satirized when you see like Vought engaging in this sort of like faux gay rights activism. What's being satirized is not the fact that people are pro-gay or are, you know, pro civil rights or whatever. What's being satirized is like people not being as convicted around those principles as they could be. And
So
then
not
look,
genuine.
yeah, and so then look how they satirize like right wing beliefs, like people who are fans of guns or people who are religious. They've had both of these groups in the show, and the satirization isn't these people like don't really believe in guns and aren't like truly, you know, strong enough believers. They're just, you know, politically cashing in. The satire is like these people are genuinely like crazy in some fundamental way, and their beliefs are fundamentally crazy. And so I think that's the difference, where it's like even when it's a position that I don't necessarily disagree with. Like I don't disagree that gay rights are good or that like black people should have equal rights. But I think that like the portrayal is just like so it's like eye roll worthy. Where it's like it's only on one side and it's like so heavy handed.
I would say that the portrayal of like at least like the Christianity in The Boys, that there is a positive example of like Christianity in say Starlight, right? Before she like became like disillusioned with that. But I would say the treatment, or at least like the portrayal of someone like A Train, so playing up like black heritage stuff, like the faux progressivism or the gay stuff around Maeve, or like the girls get at them thing around like Stormfront, Maeve, and Starlight, right? I would say that cynical pushing or cynical weaponizing is similar to how like say Homelander is technically an ordained minister, or how I think it's really for both of them is just the context of hypocrisy, because you have the conservatives, like the case of Ezekiel, right? He's like the head of this the Vought religious movement, but he's secretly gay and he preaches against it while still doing it. But in the case of A Train, like say like his brand is now African American progressivism, but we all know he doesn't really give a shit about that whatsoever. The only time he ever actually cared was when something directly affected him and his family, or like from pushing from his brother. So I guess like for me, when I look at those, I see those as criticisms in sort of the same vein of hypocrisy, and I don't think they're particularly different. Although I would agree with you that I could say that one side might be portrayed as genuinely good, or people are frustrated that they're not living up to those ideals. But I would say Starlight, at least like in season one, had the same sort of criticisms of other like Christians or the other people of the Christian like place with like the Capes for Christ people, where she was like, "Why are you behaving like this? Because we aren't supposed to be doing this." There are good ways of being a Christian, and she sort of like I'd say embodies those. So I would say that there's less positive examples of conservatism, but I don't know how much more. I guess maybe this is just like this is probably my bias. Right, so you have someone from like Des Moines, Iowa, right, going to the big city, and like there's that culture shock, and then like trying to maintain their values in the case of like this corporatism. I'd say that's probably like a somewhat conservative value system, like at least like values being portrayed of someone trying to maintain their the values that they grew up with, like in a new hyper corporatized place. Does that make sense? I was talking a lot.
It
Sorry.
could make sense. Yeah. I think the thing is that, like, one, Starlight's values are not portrayed to be like Christian or conservative Christian, right? So, like, when she's critiquing Christians, she's giving this sort of like progressive critique that a lot of people have of Christians, where they'll be like, well, you're not living up to the principles as I believe they should be lived up to. Oftentimes, as like a secular person. And so, like, I've listened to a lot of like Christian right wing commentators, and they will complain that people come up to them and say things that, like, Jesus would be a socialist, and like he's going to say all of these things and he would be on my side. And they'll ask these people, like, do you believe in Jesus? Do you like, are you invested in it? Have you like read, or studied the Bible? And the answer is no. They've taken a certain interpretation and like weaponized it against the Christian conservatives' beliefs. And so that's how it feels to me, where it's like she is saying not that these people need to be like more truly conservative Christian, but like the way that they're being Christian is bad, aka right wing, and they need to be like more progressive and more inclusive and whatnot.
I think that her criticism to them was particularly that it was like too right wing. It was that it was hypocritical in that like in terms of their own values. And I think conservatives supposedly care about that sort of stuff too, right? I don't think that's like a uniquely left thing saying this is hypocrisy, right? It's like the same way if like a conservative would say to a lefty, "Oh, you say you care about the poor, but like I don't see you at the soup kitchen or like donating to charity or anything like that. All you do is like screech online," right? So I don't think that's a unique thing to lefties critiquing righties.
I agree. What I'm saying is that, like, when the show portrays hypocrisy, so like when it shows someone who's like a Christian minister but is actually like engaging in gay sex, the message of the show isn't, oh, this minister should stop doing that because gay sex is bad and he's right and he's just not living up to his good principles of being homophobic. The message is that, like, his principles don't have any underlying value because they're hypocritical, and he should just like embrace his sexuality and stop like torturing himself over trying to pursue what he believes is falsely true. That's like the takeaway message, versus the takeaway message with someone like A Train or Maeve and Vought's relationship with her is that these companies do need to be more progressive. So in both cases, the solution that the show is pitching is that these people should be more progressive. And so, I can say all of that. I think The Boys, at the end of the day, is like a pretty good satire of a lot of things. And it is written with like a lot more nuance than you see in other kinds of media. So like the fact that we're even talking about The Boys and that we can criticize it in this way, I think we're really criticizing like the best example of like left-wing satire on society, or like one of the best examples of it in the current media environment. And there are so many worse examples, which are just, terrible. Like the comic book that shows Jordan Peterson as Red Skull, and it's just this like plain ridiculous pandering. Or like, I guess another thing that's been happening is like the rewriting of a Black Thor character, and it's like so painfully obvious that the character is not written by a Black person, and as far as I know he isn't, and it's just like this ridiculous pandering to like Black stereotypes in order to appear like progressive and diverse, and it just fails spectacularly.
So I guess like the question for like I know the like the Bread Pains comic you're talking about, right? Would you say levy the same criticism at Stone Toss for being sort of similar in that it is, I would say, relatively aggressively writer wing.
I
But
so
sorry,
like
go ahead.
I was looking for examples of media bias like just before we talked, and I found a lot of them that I thought were like too inherently political to genuinely criticize. So like um Jon Stewart was like one of these examples where like people were criticizing him for making this like big leftward shift. And I forget exactly what the topic was, but he had this like panel where he brought people on, and he was
Oh, he was screaming about the like I think it was racism, right? And like white people need to shut up or something,
something
right?
like that, right? And people were like, he's like gone too woke, and this is terrible. But I think Jon Stewart is like inherently a political kind of guy, and like he talks about these issues all the time. So I don't know if that's like really a good criticism for him, because it's like, well, he's not trying to be like a neutral audience. He's not trying to tell a story that is like ostensibly non-political. He started out with a political message and then like built everything around that. And so I think that like if you have media that is like explicitly left-wing inherently, and that like the goal is to tell a left-wing message and not to tell a story, then I think that's like less criticizable. It still might not be interesting, but like I'll get it more.
Like in the same way that I could say, in the way that Tucker Carlson is right wing, like newscasting propaganda, you could say that John Oliver is something similar for like left leaning things, right? Where
Yeah,
it's
very much.
okay, and so those are less, and those are more. It's okay because they're explicitly saying I am political. This is my message, and you take less of an issue with those. So even like say, does that so would that mean like we're taking because I feel like that excuses like the bread pain, like the Red Skull comic about Jordan Peterson, right? Because it's being like aggressively left wing, right? Because like I don't think the bread pains guy like he has bread in his name. I can think he's referencing bread too, right? So I feel like that's just shitty, specific, hyper partisan media in the sense that's sort of always existed. And so like if I'm reading you right, it's that the general media just has so much more progressive undertones than conservative undertones.
Yeah, and so like the problem I think is that like Ayn Rand is like a good example of this on the right, where like people will read Ayn Rand and they'll read these like cardboard characters. I don't know if you've ever read her, but it's like ridiculous to read her, where like
Yeah,
the good people are like based objectivists and they never do anything wrong and they're super virtuous. And the people who like government, even just a little bit, are like complete scum and just like morally depraved and they're like cheating on people and they're just like evil, 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 right? And there's like no complexity or depth to these characters. And so
right.
I think that like the way to read Ayn Rand is really as like a parable, sort of, where like these characters are like archetypes and they're meant to like really express her philosophy. And when you read her like that, it becomes just like a political manifesto, and you understand why the story is like so poorly written. But like
Right.
the
This is
reality,
a political manifesto. Like every time John Galt talks, he's just like it's just him spewing exactly what she thinks, like over like verbatim.
exactly, and it makes for like a terrible story, at least in my opinion. I think it makes for like an interesting political manifesto, but like if you're reading it for the drama, you know who's going to win and who's going to lose in the end. Like you understand who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and who's going to have like superhuman powers of intelligence and whatnot by the end of the story. And so I think the same thing happens on the left, where like you have characters, often like minority characters, who are just like not allowed to fail or to be interesting in any way because that would detract from a progressive message.
Okay, and I get, and I think maybe we could say that some characters, or at least like those characters, like I think we could probably agree, like one of the best cases of this would be someone like Captain Marvel, right? Where it's like it doesn't seem that it's like they're afraid to let her look like she's failing, even though she's say the first woman being say whatever Air Force pilot or whatever her thing was, and she in her example of a struggle was just realizing her full potential and falling down a rope once, right? There wasn't a serious thing where she was ever out of her depth or overpowered. It was very much just she wants to do something, she's talented and capable, and she does those things. So it makes it more difficult.
And it's a
I
real shame because like the most interesting female characters are ones that are like allowed to struggle and to be complex and dynamic.
I got you. I guess. Oh gosh. one female character, okay, I think is complex and dynamic that I absolutely despise, okay? I think my favorite female character in The Boys is Kimiko, and my least favorite is Starlight. I'll be honest.
Interesting.
I
Okay.
fucking hate Starlight, all right? I find her insufferable. Not because I realize I said that I thought you had some conservative values earlier, and that's not why I find her insufferable. I just want to be very clear about that, okay? I find her insufferable for other reasons, okay? And the main one is she feels extremely waffly in terms of what she really wants to do,
Mm.
and that she flip flops between being like say cowed by Homelander versus not being cowed. And I think that complexity kind of takes away a good amount of her agency as a character. Where in the course of say this season, right, she hasn't really done a lot. Most of what she's done until like this very episode, right, was her just like sitting there being like, "Fuck, like I can't help because like I'm not strong enough to fight other superheroes." Also, I just find it like a disservice to her that every fight she's ever been in with other superheroes, she gets the shit kicked out of her. I don't think I've ever seen Starlight win an on-screen fight, so it just makes me frustrated like with that specific part. So she's weak,
She doesn't
right?
have much agency at all. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and she's indecisive. But I feel like Kimiko is dealing with crazy shit all the time. Like she lost her brother, she lost her parents, she lost her ability to speak. Also, we can talk about the mutant death thing. I think that's actually really interesting. I saw that too, and I was but I really thought it was cool how she saw like how she sees like her powers as sort of a curse, and her trying to get away from that and like live a more peaceful life is something that I would say a lot of characters, at least like say female characters, don't get the opportunity to. Like you have essentially a female character saying, "I don't want to be special. I just want to find a fucking quiet life with Frenchie and bake cookies all day, and that's all I want." And I think that while still being the dangerous character that she is and having but her physicality when she's doing like her stunts and stuff, I just think it's a very dynamic character to watch. And I think she's also like props to the actress who's just remarkably expressive even when she can't speak. I just think it's a really dynamic and enjoyable character to watch on screen. Where every time I'm watching Starlight, it's like to me it reminds me of when I'm reading Game of Thrones novels and I go to a fucking Daenerys chapter. And I'm just like shit. I'm gonna be standing here for 30 minutes. She's going to be sitting and talking about how she's the rightful queen, but she's not really going to be doing anything, and she's going to be listening to like political people that she doesn't fully understand that she fucking hates. And I'm just going to I'm waiting for like other chapters. So, but maybe just because I hate women, right? But I
Well,
just
it's really interesting that like your favorite female character in the show is one who like is mute and just wants to live like a quiet life, and like like her biggest desire is not to have power but to just develop like an interpersonal relationship, which is
conservative
basically,
undertones. They got me. They got me.
yeah, exactly, which is like the most conservative message.
And maybe that's because it's interesting, right? But I feel like it fits the character well. In the same way that I would say probably my favorite character on the entire show up until very recently was Homelander. I fucking love
Mm.
Homelander, not because I agree with him or like him, but I just find him so interesting because there's so many takes on evil Superman. Like I've read Red Sun, I've read Injustice, all this sort of stuff, and none of it holds a candle to just how fucked up he is and how every single aspect of his fucked upness you can see where it came from. And at the same time, despite him being like massively psychotic and fucked up, he's extremely competent. Like all the time. Like in season 1, he's the one who found out who the boys were. He's the one who did like the detective work for that. He's the one who's masquerading like as like the public face who ends up stealing away the company. And like there's missteps where he oversteps his bounds. But I like that he is a genuinely like horrible but like relatively competent villain. And I really really enjoy the complexity of his character. And I think it's actually really funny. How do you feel about him as I think they're making this more and more apparent as like just a Trump analog. How do you feel about that? Like because I feel like he initially started as something different, and as like the seasons have gone on, it's kind of become more blatant with its messaging. Especially like when they like post a speech, they're like, "You're up 44 points with like a Midwest dads," and I'm like, "Fucking God!" They had to throw that in there, you know?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like I think The Boys is like one of these examples where it's like it's pretty good satire And like a worse show would handle this much worse, and it'd probably make me cringe more in other types of shows where it's like these fucking like these Midwestern dads, they're so racist, right? They don't want to be like told what to do by minorities, where it's like very eye rolly. But I think that like within the context of the universe, they do build to it to the point where it's like it does feel a little bit more earned by the time they get to it. And also like this is another thing about Blue Hawk, right? Where like his engagement in like police brutality is like very earned within the context of the universe because he like literally does not need to engage in this kind of violence against like average ordinary people
because he's bulletproof. Like, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So like he really has like no excuse to engage in this sort of stuff besides just like enjoying it, or you know, he just likes cracking like the skulls of black people. So like there's this built-in in-universe justification that actually makes it make sense. And then also that's like why I think it's like so frustrating to just like, well, we don't know what to do with this character, so we'll just have him like sort of go crazy and start, you know, throwing people around when he doesn't need to.
Well, I think part of why he would do that, and I guess we can fight about this, is because I think you're completely right in that he doesn't really have a good justification for how he's been treating these people for the reasons you described, right? Where it's like, oh, a superpowered guy, even like a low-level superpowered guy, is just so far beyond the scope of regular people that he doesn't have a good reason for doing any of this. And when people question him on it, is he supposed to say publicly, oh, you're right, guys, I've just been a racist piece of shit? He's going to get defensive. And so I guess is it just like how much he lashed out? Because like I'd say at the beginning, I wasn't expecting him to like actually start like hitting people or something like that. I expected him to almost like storm out. I guess like if we actually if I come back to this point where it's like if we could rewrite that scene, what would you want to happen with Blue Hawk in the course of this story? Would he be like learning and actually give a real apology, or would it be just A-Train would have to kill him like he did anyway after he's like, buddy, I'm never going to change?
So I think like a better way to deliver the sort of progressive message is not to just make him like this sort of like crazy psychopath, but actually make him someone who like actively uses the excuse of crime to like engage in this brutality over like a long period of time. So like I think it kind of, if anything, it detracts from the actual like heart of the criticism. And the heart of the criticism is that like you have this person who's able to use crime as like a justification to engage in racist violence, right? And that like is maybe an interesting criticism to be made. And it would be interesting if he like continued to use that justification and was able to like continue to get away with what he's doing, you know, to the point where A-Train realizes that like no one's able to stand up to him because he always has this kind of continual plausible deniability. And so like by betraying that plausible deniability and just sort of like throwing people around in like a peaceful area where there's cameras and whatnot, I think that like it ignores the actual problem, which is that like maybe some people use crime as a justification for violence, and just shifts the blame onto like, oh, there's like people who are like really crazy and are going to engage in violence like wherever, which is like a much less interesting message to point out. And the only reason you end up with this message is because you get this like exaggeration of this character that takes it out of reality, out of nuance, and out of a realm that is interesting and into the realm of just like white cops are bad, which is like not interesting.
Got you. I think I would probably say that I could agree with your point if we could make it better, but I would probably say making him better, honestly, would have started and ended the same, but we only saw him for say 5 scenes, right? Like in total, and that's not even the ones he was in. We're talking like other people talking about him as well.
Mhm.
You know, like the initial like video like with his brother, then like the sit down with A-Train, and then like the scene like at the community center, and then the like the hero gasm ending. So I think I'm not sure how, given like that same like span of time, that they could have shown all of the brutality, because I remember him saying it was like one of the white guy answers, right, where it was like, I go where the crime is, because I really think I almost appreciate that type of his character where he doesn't think he's really doing anything wrong, like just like the nature. I think that characterization, like, for me, plays really well, not because I want like a evil conservative bad guy, but it's like it's a guy who's completely like like he's convicted. But that's the wrong word. So he has conviction about like what he's doing is the right thing, and he's just in like the wrong space, the wrong time, and these people are ungrateful to him because he feels like he's doing the community a service, and even if he messes up every now and then, he thinks he's a good guy. And I don't think we ever really got that character work from Blue Hawk. I think his actor did a great job like making him seem like an asshole, but I would have wanted like say one or two more scenes, like you said, like giving his backstory. And I think if we had not backstory, but like his motivations, if I'd had that and then had the community center scene, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. But I feel like I have to fill in things for him to get to that community scene in the way that we're describing. Because I have no issue so much with the community scene, but I do have an issue where it could have been done better in terms of explaining his motivations. Because I think with like the limited stuff I have, I can cobble together like why he would do that thing where he's being attacked. He doesn't think it's fair. People are attacking him for being essentially a hero. These people are ungrateful, and they start coming at him. And then he has the boomer mentality where he's like, oh, like, you know, all lives matter. Why are people like attacking me or saying Black Lives Matter? Why are you accusing me of murdering black men? I only stop criminals, and sometimes I kill them, but like I'm a good guy. And I think it's a normal thing for him to be angry about that. And it seems like he has no issue with the use of force in his daily life, like including lethal force. And maybe he didn't even like mean to kill these people. He just like wanted to get them away from him. Where he's like he pushed them or he threw them out of the way. And I just don't I don't think that in and of itself was necessarily the problem. I think they kind of went heavy-handed with his character in the episode after. I really didn't like what they did with him at Herogasm. I think they just made him too much of a caricature where they were like, oh, like, you know, Homelander says like fake news media, like da 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 da. I think that was too much for me. I feel like that was a weird place to put him, if I'm being honest. Especially given his value system, right? Where it's like you wouldn't think a boomer, but to be fair, like a lot of the boomers are like also hedonists behind the scenes. But like you wouldn't expect, say, a boomer tradcon guy to be going to a superhero orgy. So I just feel like that was a bad spot to end on him. And if I had to criticize their characterization of him, it just didn't make a ton of sense for me there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree that like in order to tell a more nuanced and interesting story, a lot of times you just need more time. But I think that like their inclusion of certain details within the time frame that they did tell the story detracts from it. And so like the fact that he's like yelling, like he's like all lives matter, and then he's like, you know, beating up these black people who are just like, you know, yelling at him in a town hall. I think that that's like another example of like the kind of eye-rolly progressive moments where rather than like maybe actually exploring that idea or the tension between people who say like all lives matter and Black Lives Matter and what he might mean by that. Instead, they're just caricaturing him as like, well, look at this all lives matter person, and now he's throwing people into walls. What an evil guy, right? So there's no actual like nuance or exploration in the same way that there's like no nuance or exploration of an atheist in God's Not Dead, right? You're never going to hear like a real argument. You're just going to hear like a cartoonish one, and then they're going to be evil. And I think it's the same thing here where it's like you just hear like a cartoonish sort of caricature, and then he starts like throwing people into walls. And it's not interesting to say that like people who say all lives matter are like crazy psychos. That's not an interesting take, I don't think, or interesting satire. And so that felt like really disappointing because there could have been an interesting satire, which would have said something more meaningful, but it just became exaggerated to the point of ridiculousness.
Right. And I think that was probably shorthand for them to get do an easy way of giving A-Train the kind of struggle that he gave Huey like in season 1.
And that was an interesting parallel, right? Yeah. And so I think that like knowing that they were like aiming for that, right? And
because that didn't hit me until it actually happened. Because I thought he was just gonna spit in his face at the party, but
mhm,
when he was actually just like, "Oh fuck, man, I actually am really sorry." Like I was losing my shit.
yeah,
Like
and that's
it
like
just
really interesting, right?
yeah, I really like that. I thought that was I thought they did that really well, and
Hmm.
but I understand what you're saying that like it definitely could have been better, especially yeah, especially with his characterization because I think he went from this guy commits too much like violence against random black people to thanks soup lives matter, which is like even if he had just said like all lives matter,
Hmm.
like he went from like boomer to white lives matter, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I think a good amount of boomers aren't even like super comfortable with like the white lives matter thing, right? Because that's like more explicitly far right.
Yeah, no.
Um,
They just grew up
yeah,
in like the civil rights era where they heard like this like Martin Luther King saying like I'm a man and like I just need to be treated like the Constitution ensures I should be treated. And so like to them all lives matter is like a very obvious sort of like undeniable statement, right? Um, and white lives matter feels like it's taking a side.
right. I got you. Okay. And then okay, can we talk about Soldier Boy for a second? I love him so much. He's like I said, he's my new favorite character. Homelander used to be my old favorite character. I just think Soldier Boy is actually like a boomer grandpa
Mm-hmm.
who like he's like old style American patriotism, you know? He has some like older outdated beliefs, but he genuinely thought what he did was the right thing because he actually fought in World War II and stuff. And he experienced and he's never and he in his private moments he experiences regret or like sadness about how he feels like things were like when he talked about Afghanistan. I was lost my shit. He was like, we left the brave Mujahideen fighters to rot. What
Mm-hmm.
happened there? So that was just I enjoyed that, but I also thought it was complicated because he's 100% okay with just killing people that he thinks have crossed him, but and he also is unapologetic for hurting different people. It's when Mother's Milk asked him, you killed my family. He's like, which one? And it's just like, oh fuck, this guy's killed a lot of people, like a lot of people, and he doesn't feel bad about any of it. And so
Mm-hmm.
it really seems like him, where it's like, I liked his juxtaposition of Homeland, where Soldier Boy is totally comfortable killing any person as long as he thinks it's as long as he thinks like he has justification for it. But if he feels like it's not, then he feels terrible about it. He feels like his life was a bit of a lie. He feels like people have betrayed him, but he doesn't lash out in the way that you'd expect Homelander to, where he's like burn everything down. He's very specific and targeted with like who he wants to attack. And I think that's a very different, like sort of like older, like bad, like white guy vibe that I really enjoy as a character compared to Homelander. And I'm not saying either one of them is better than the other one. It's just I think they're both very unique in how they portray their anger and how they respond to the world being unfair to them. And and also that fight scene was just like that was fucking phenomenal. Okay, like I was losing my shit. And I love how they bounced off each other.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I really enjoyed how they didn't make Homelander a bitch. Because what I was nervous about was that as soon as he was confronted with someone who could potentially fight him, he would be terrified, right? But he went for it the entire time. It was very there's this fun trope called villainous valor, where it's like even the bad guys can still be courageous in the sense that they're willing to like put themselves in danger. And I think Homelander, it added even more depth to his character that he was willing to go there and do that, and only left when he was literally about to die. I thought that was cool. I like what they did for Home. I just again like I can sit for the boys all day because it's just such a good show. But other shows, okay. So what are some examples for enough like gushing about that because I think we can both agree it's probably pretty good. What are some of you like some shows or movies or stuff that you take a lot more issue with that they're not as good? Like we talked about The Shape of Water a little bit. Um,
Yeah, we talked about the shape of water a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to say that there's like one show that is particularly bad about this. Um, I think that it's just like oftentimes when you have a villain in TV or you have like a cool character, they're going to make like some snappy comment about like, oh, these like old white men are like so terrible. Or like that's, like that's capitalism for you. These sorts of things, which are like, partially they're just like, I don't know, caricatures or like satires of like the younger generation, but they're definitely portrayed as like correct, or at least like justified in being like these terrible old white guys are the villains of our universe. I don't know. I just think that like it's not a very interesting message when the takeaway is that like some people are racist and that's bad, because it's true, but it's just like it's been
Nope.
done, I guess. It's
Right.
like another story where like the conclusion is that like racism's not good. And sometimes it's done with like a great deal of gravitas and like, excellent cinematography and acting. And it's like rooted in the real world. Like, I think Hidden Figures is like a good example of this, where it's like a good movie on like all of these technical levels. But like
Right.
the conclusion was like people are racist and sexist is like not a very interesting conclusion. And so you can like appreciate so much of the movie, but also feel like the ultimate conclusion is not a very interesting one.
Okay. I think this might be a slightly different way as to how we approach stories. Because when you said like, oh, you did it in a really great technical way, but the underlying message itself isn't particularly interesting, right? When I've read a lot of like books and comic books and watched shit tons of movies, and I was a big like cinephile and like big reader when I was younger, and even now, right? And for me, at this point, have you heard of the phrase every story that's ever been told, so that's going to be told has been told, or there's
I've
only say
heard of
like
the idea, yeah.
yeah, and I'm a big proponent of that, in that oftentimes human beings are pretty creative with how our stories have gone for a long time, and there's been so many books and so many movies that I very much doubt that a movie or show can be entirely unique while still being comprehensible to people. And for me, most of my enjoyment is how well a lot of those things are executed. It's like me watching, say, a bad shonen anime versus a good shonen anime. I know what I'm looking for. I know what the specific tropes around it are, what things are normally subverted, which things are not. And it really depends for me how much I enjoy that series based on how well it uh, gives its characters unique personalities and characterization, and gives them good motives and how they bounce off of each other. Because you can have an extremely, say, boring by the number story on paper, but it's the most engrossing thing to watch because of how the characters bounce off each other, and because of how like either the cinematography or how the pacing like drives you through. And so I enjoy it in that sort of sense more often than I look at, say, every single explicit theme, because I can analyze movies like that. I did like different media analysis and film studies classes in college, right? But it that's not the biggest reason why I watch a lot of these things, because I feel like the best way to get, say, I'd say, arguments wouldn't be oftentimes from a movie. It would be from, say, reading someone's like work or papers, right?
Yeah, yes. I think that you're right that like a lot of these ideas are not original, but like no idea is really going to be original. With that said, I think that like there's an ease in which you can sort of just like pin everything on like a bad person who's just like bad inherently, and then not have to explore any interesting questions surrounding that. So like jumping to like another example, there's a show on Netflix called Arcane, and it
Oh yeah,
has this. Yeah, I think it's good, and it has this tension where you have this character, Heimerdinger, who like is a very much a traditionalist, and he wants certain characters to follow procedure and to be very cautious and conservative in their introduction of technology, and he's very much like staunch on that. And he is contrasted with characters who are saying that, like, no, we really need to bring in this technology. We really need to change the order of things so that, like, people who are not part of royal houses can have ideas that are being expressed within the city and are able to contribute, right? And so like you have both of these positions, and they're portrayed in a way that neither is like truly wrong or truly evil. And so like you see how the introduction of new technology and new power, does bring good things, but it can also be like incredibly destructive. And so it makes sense why Heimerdinger has these values and wants, Jace to be more conservative with his use of them. And I think that in a worse show, it would have just been portrayed as like, oh, you've got this like old guy who like doesn't understand and is just holding back progress because he's like not good and he's just like an idiot, right? That would be a worse show. And like both of these stories where like tradition is like has value, that's a story that's been told before. But I think that like the contrast and the nuance is making it more interesting.
I would actually agree with you and take it a step further in that I found it kind of odd that Heimerdinger was pretty much wrong all the time, right? And he was eventually forced out of power and he was excised, right? And he was ended up hiding out with Echo. And I actually thought we were going to bring it up as a criticism as opposed to a good thing, because I agree that he has like these old style traditional values, and he has very good reasons for it because he was alive during the Rune Wars, so he knew exactly like the dangers of magic and all that sort of stuff. But there was never really a moment there where he was unequivocally right. So many times was, oh, he told Jace not to do this, and then Jace made this really cool thing with Victor, and then you should stay away from the hex cord. Then Victor ends up almost fixing his leg, right? And there's all these things that where something terrible should or could have happened to prove him correct, and I never saw him get any of those victories, and that honestly kind of bothered me because at the end of the season, he's like, he's destitute and stuck in the Undercity now, and like he just doesn't have any of his old like clout or power, and I thought that was really odd watching that in particular, because I was expecting him at some point to be proven right, where people say, whether, especially with Noxus coming in and other city-states looking at Piltover as this new center of power, I was like, there's got to be some guy who said that this was a bad idea be proved right, and this never happened. I would honestly say a more successful example of a complicated elder character in the show was Silco. I love Silco. I thought he was an awesome villain. I thought his motivations were perfect. Everything he said made perfect sense, but he conflicted with his own values because of his love for Jinx. And I just really, really enjoyed how he acted throughout the show and his depth. And there was never a moment, because it was so funny for so much of the show where they're like, the Zonites are the bad guys. And I'm like, Piltover sucks, okay? All the council, they're a bunch of like asshole dickheads. They're talking about, oh, my wine refineries won't get their shipments off in time. And then like in the meantime, Silco's like, we're fighting for fucking scraps down here. I'll do whatever. And like, obviously, he's an asshole who's like a controlling like crime kingpin at the same time. So it's really hard to trust him on that. But I would say he does still care about the Undercity, but he thinks the way of taking care of it is by making it stronger and giving it respect.
Well, the other thing about the underworld is that like it is deeply meritocratic, where you see these people who become crime lords and they're like the weirdos and the drudges of society, the people who are like rejected by the gleaming, shining Piltover because they were like too unusual or too, they had ideas that were too crazy. And yet they've managed to find like a lot of success. And so you see this like world in the underworld that is like very enabling of like anyone who can prove to be strong. And because it has this like intense self-selection, like evolutionary process going on in there, like you can't afford to be like picky with the people who are going to help you. And that's an interesting like thing to contrast with, I think, like the top Piltover, the people above ground, because you see like how brutal and terrible it is to have like no laws and to just have this like anarchy and whoever's strong survives. but you also see like how restrictions and laws can like prevent people who might otherwise help society from like rising up and contributing. And so I think that this tension between like all of this suffering with like ostensible equality and whatnot versus like this restriction and traditionalism, but with like a great degree of like, you know, success and prosperity is really contrasted off of each other. And neither is portrayed as being objectively better than the other.
Right. And I think that's how you see different power players growing inside each of the cities, right? In Piltover, Jason, like you have to break up these traditional structures because they're bad and that they're stopping progress. They're making lives worse for people. You have like that fucking idiot who couldn't solve a Rubik's Cube on the council, right? These people are just useless and they're only there by virtue of like either money or their parentage or whatever. But the Undercity, the important thing was the order and security provided by either Vander and then later Silco, because you needed someone to keep people reasonably safe, even though there was this measure of equality and like you can do whatever you want, but like there's no safety net
Well, when
there.
you do whatever you want, like you could also do terrible drugs or develop weapons that like destroy people, you know, for the tiniest scrap of power. And you see that with like, I don't know what it's called, but like the purple liquid that Silco
Oh,
develops.
Shimmer, yeah.
Shimmer, right? Where like people want this power. And in the pursuit of power, they destroy themselves, but they also make it so other people also need to pursue the same power in order to be competitive. And so
Hmm.
I think that like you really see this sort of like this corrupting influence where Silco's developing these drugs, which will destroy people in the underground, but also give them power to challenge Piltover. And Piltover needs to, as a result, engage in research and development of destructive magical force in order to counter them. And in both cases, this like ostensible technological progress is really this kind of Faustian bargain where you develop these dangerous technologies and they steal something from your soul but allow you to like conquer your enemy. And I think that's like it's such a good example of how this like classic game theory like prisoner's dilemma where you can defect and do something that's like worse overall, but allows you to like gain some sort of bit of power for yourself. And that really stems from like a lack of order in general. Like
Hmm.
if Piltover, if the top sides like controlled the Undercity from the beginning and had like a managed society and didn't allow the development of this, you know, this drug, then they wouldn't need to develop these dangerous magics to counter it. And so my like takeaway from the show was that it felt very reactionary to me in its overall message. But the fact that it was able to give like so much nuance to all of these different positions was still very interesting.
I agree. I thought that was really good. So would you say then Arcane is another say good example of media, right?
Well, I think that like Arcane is like it comes out as like a quite reactionary show. That's like my interpretation of its themes. So I don't know if it'd be like totally fair,
Oh,
but I think it's very nuanced in its like portrayal. So yeah.
how do you consider it reactionary? Is it just because it's not as aggressively like rah rah like progressivism in the same way?
No,
Like
because I
because it
think the fundamental philosophy is that like order is good and having like a quality and like tradition is good and regulations are good and having like a society that has like, you know, equality and ability for people to pursue whatever pleasures they want or whatever like drugs or technologies they want ultimately threatens not only their own society but the societies of everyone around them. I think that's like the overarching message because like yeah, that's what I ultimately took away from it.
oh, okay. That was I took away similar things in that I thought the this is actually really fun because like as a lefty, I saw like a lot of the lefty themes where it was let's say the underground were fighting for independence,
Mhm.
like justifiably so from say an overcity that did not care about them and used them as a dumping ground for chemicals and scrap. And I thought that it was an example of how say far potentially like an oppressed group of people could go to like get that kind of independence from someone over the top. I can see all the themes you're talking about because I can like the idea of needing these safeguards of
But I think that's
protecting.
what makes it such a great show is that you can like
Okay,
go into it and see that like all these different perspectives are presented in like as strong a possible light as possible. That like if you empathize with one, you can like really you feel like it's being represented in a good way.
that's fair. Okay, yeah, I would agree that that's a sign of a good show where one, the world feels like really nice and fleshed in and lived in and fleshed out, but also you understand the character motivations of most of the main characters at the very least. And even if they disagree or on the same side, they all want slightly different things, and that affects how they like what they're willing to do. So I agree with you that I think it's a really good example of another show. I guess like the last question I sort of have, right? I'll see where this goes. Is when we're talking about values, right? I would say there are some values that I would consider inherently conservative, right?
Mm.
Or at least like shorthand for conservative, that are almost always present in a lot of media. It's just certain other values are not as represented, right? So in the case of um take most superhero movies, right? The idea of powerful people having responsibility, right? Like the chosen few need to wield their capacity responsibly. The responsibility to protect, like, say, your friends or your family.
Mhm.
I see those things in terms of in almost like a traditionalist lens, where they're not saying I must protect, like, my fellow proletariat, right? I was given like this sort of like choice. A lot of superhero stuff, at least in my opinion, I think leans traditionalist in that it's about exceptional people making the choice to help the world and make it a better place. I think that's it's almost like Ayn Randian, like in its philosophy. At least like that's how I take. At least like in the case of someone's like say Tony Stark, right? This is a guy who could fuck off, do whatever he wants, but he's like, I'm going to be a superhero because I personally enjoy it and it makes the world a better place. And I would say that's like a good example of like a more traditional value superhero. Like he's still a hedonist and all that sort of stuff, right? But the value system that he operates off of, I would say that's more right wing loosely than left wing, right? Like what are the left wing values of Tony Stark?
Well,
Aside,
I mean, I think it. I don't know if I can like totally speak to
that's
Marvel
okay.
movies,
Sorry.
but like just in general, it's like the values between conservatives and progressives. I think that like progressives have they see value in like overthrowing established order and like doing what's right. And I think that conservatives see value in just like maintaining a sort of like peaceful status quo, this kind of order. And so this is
Okay.
really like this liberty like kind of oppression matrix. And so I think I see like a lot of superhero stories as like the liberty oppression matrix where you have like great people who are being like oppressed by their society and really they just need to like throw off those shackles and like exert what they truly know is to be true and good on the world. There's actually a good amount of research into like the moral viewpoints of liberals and conservatives. And like liberals tend to really value care and like harm, or like they really value care and really despise harm. They really value liberty and despise oppression. And they also value fairness and dislike cheating. But then there's also like loyalty, authority, and sanctity, which are three values that they don't really value.
Yeah, the righteous mind paradigm, right?
Exactly,
I read that book.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that like conservatives are more like equally spread. And so I think that like a lot of superhero movies, I'm not sure if they really present like loyalty, authority, sanctity as like super important values. Though perhaps loyalty, I don't know.
Have you seen like this is like a really common leftist critique of superheroes
Hmm.
where they essentially are almost always fighting to preserve the status quo. So often, like in a lot of these movies, it's the villain who's like, I have to make change. I have to like do something big, right? And I would say like this is probably most what's it called? Like best explained, say like in the Captain America movies, right? So the first Captain America movie, he's fighting the Nazis, and there's like this point where the Red Skull's like, Captain, in my future there will be no flags, right? Like one world government, like I'm doing like this thing, and Cap's like, not my future, da 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 da. And then in the second Captain America movie, it's explicitly a plot by the government to take out exceptional people. That's like the entire plot, is that they're gonna get 3 fucking helicarriers with a bunch of machine gun sniper rifles, and then fly 3 miles in the air and just shoot every person in the United States that poses a threat to them. And it's about Cap and his private team of like also exceptional friends that stop them. And then in Civil War, even though like the deeper thing is emotional stuff around Bucky and Tony Stark's parents, the conflict politically is that Captain America doesn't want to be beholden to a government that tells him where he can and can't go in terms of helping people. And so I would say for at least for some heroes, that those things do matter in terms of like the responsibility and the tradition and doing what you personally. I don't see doing what you personally think is right as an inherently left or right value, because I see examples of, say, conservatives like standing up to the government doing that versus, say, like liberals fighting like an oppressive thing. Like, but like everyone wants to like think of themselves as an individual fighting against some sort of like oppressive system, whether it's like a white man who feels like trapped, or a BLM activist, right? So I would say that those values are at least philosophically or spiritually owned by both sides. Mm-hmm. The values that I see from conservatism that I will 100% agree with you that are not really represented are, I would say, more hardline traditional social values, right? And the ones that I would say for those would be explicit homophobia or transphobia or racism portrayed in a non-negative light, right? I would say those are like the big 3 for media in terms of not being portrayed. I think there's a good amount of media that gives strong inklings about, say, the family, about, say, individual like exceptionalism, like being, stamped down by oppressive people, like fucking Incredibles, right? I'd say that's another like Randian film where it's you literally have fucking superheroes told by the government, stop being exceptional, you're causing too many problems, and they have to fucking hide away. So I'd say there's a lot of good examples of those sort of conservative values, but it's like those specific 3 social values that aren't portrayed. And I think I feel like this sounds like a cop-up. I really think this is true.
Well, the thing about like conservatives is they do value those things, right? Like they do value care, and they do value like liberty, and they do value like fairness, right? So like there is like a lot of overlap. The thing is just that like liberals value more care and more liberty and more fairness, right? And so like it's not to say that like it's one or the other. I do think that you make like a good point that I didn't think of, which is that like superhero movies, oftentimes the villain is like fighting to destroy the status quo. I didn't really consider that, but I think that's like a good point, and like it is like a factor into. Have
you seen all like the leftist brain rot memes where they're like, why doesn't Batman just like fund all the poverty programs in Gotham? Why does he just want to beat up homeless people? It's because it's fucking boring, okay? No one wants to watch Bruce Wayne in a board meeting be like, all right, we shall establish $100 million for the the Bat Kids crunch menu, like what we give like food to underdeveloped areas. And I find that very boring. But I would say part of why I find that critique boring, or at least unuseful, is because that's not the type of story that people are trying to portray. But
and then people will say that Batman is like this very like fascist hero.
Yeah, they will say that, and I would tell them like they're fucking stupid. But I don't think there's any issue with any particular type of story. But like I guess my big issue is right, and I've seen stories try and do this in certain ways, right? Like Tolkien did this somewhat, where there are certain values that I would say are associated with conservatism in the modern day. And I think you brought these up about about the young pope and like say homophobia, right? Where I'm not entirely sure how possible it is, just by nature of how, unless it's explicitly partisan media, right? And we're kind of trying to avoid those examples, where you can essentially take a hero or take a group of people and say racism against them is good, or like a homophobia is good. It's always something that's sort of like explained, or is a character trait, but it's almost never portrayed in a positive light. And again, like, this is like my liberal bias showing, where it's like I can't particularly understand how we would do that, aside from, say, making a character more complex. Like, oh, hey, he's like overall a good guy, but he's still, like a racist or a homophobe, right? But those aren't like good things. But I guess I struggle to see those stories, partially because I don't think they get greenlit. Like, that's obviously like part of the bias. Mm-hmm. But even in general, right? If I say, if we were doing a fantasy story and the two heroes were you and me, and Jesus is as white as we are, and the bad guys were all of these, say, like a blue-skinned like trolls, right? And a big part of the story is how evil the trolls inherently are and how justified the fear of them is, right? A lot of people would say that's lazy writing. Have you heard of the argument about inherent evil fantasy races is boring?
I've heard a lot of discourse on this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
How do you feel about that? Because I think I can see it both ways. Where if you want a character-driven story of individuality, like people of different races, I think it can be fun to have cultural shorthands. But just to say that, oh, this group of people are evil, or this group of like dwarves or elves or like orcs or trolls are evil, it feels really lazy. But sometimes you need that as shorthand for stories, which is totally fine. Mask off moment. One of my favorite animes is Goblin Slayer, because I just because it doesn't. There's no morality about goblins, like whether they're bad things or not. It's just like the entire thing is this like fun, creative ways of like murdering them and stopping them, like so you can save the world. And I think there are places for stories like that.
I do too. I think that the problem is when you have fantasy races that are portrayed as evil, but then also coded as like a specific racial group. So like right. If you have like trolls and they're stand-in for like Jamaican people and you're going to code them as evil, that's not good. Like, or I think that's like, I think it's morally wrong to, make that statement. But, but I don't think like having evil fantasy races is inherently bad. And I just think that like you have to divorce them from real life cultures, and you have to like ground them in the idea that like you have this race that is inherently evil, and it's not meant to be an allegory, right? You have to like establish that in some way. And so I think like a big problem is, or I think like a frustrating thing in like a lot of D&D environments is that people will really like use fantasy races as like stand-ins for human races and or like human ethnic groups. And so immediately this is problematic, because in D&D, different races are more mentally or less mentally capable, or more physically or less physically capable. And so there are inherent like physiological differences between the races in D&D. And as soon as you introduce like any sort of like allegory for real world races, like it has to budge in one way or the other. And I think it makes sense for like there to be a fantasy world where there's like a hyper intelligent species, right? I think that like that makes sense. But like if you code that hyper intelligent species as Jews, maybe not good. So like yeah. I think you have to like choose one or the other. If you're going to use this racial allegory, you can't have these like inherent evil races or inherent like smart races.
I feel like that was like part of why like Bright was like so uninteresting for me, was they were just like, guys, orcs are like black people, and then but they never delved into differences. I think there's actually a really interesting conversation to be had about like how societies would form of different sentient humanoids that have explicit differences in their averages, right? Where it's like if you're thinking like D&D stats, the way that they portray it, right, with 10 being average, and say 12 being above average, 14 being expert, 16 being like peak, 18 being like Olympic, or like the smartest, strongest person, and anything above that just being superhuman. I think it's really interesting, like how a society would form if, say, you had the dwarves who were just naturally uglier and less charismatic and less intelligent, but stronger and hardier, right? Versus like elves who are like more graceful and intelligent, but they have like weaker constitutions. Like, what would their societies look like? How would they bounce off of each other? I think those are questions that like never really get answered, and I think that'd be a really fun like sociological experiment that we never get to see.
Yeah, and those societies would probably look like very alien to like human
Yeah.
cultures, right? If they're just like fundamentally physiologically different in all of these ways. And so I think that's like another problem with using them as stand-ins for like real life races, is because like it ignores the probably like real interesting cultural changes that you'd see as a result of like physiological differences. Oh, by the way, Hans of Harkir,
Yes.
do you
Yes.
want to bring in a Kana boy? Because he
Uh,
said he wants to be let
I
in.
I know he wants to come in.
Is he
We can,
spamming you?
he's spamming you too.
He's like, let me in here.
Yeah. We can bring him in one second. I do want to ask one question of you. It's inspired by a comment in your chat, that I think I'd love to get your take on.
Yeah.
Because you're more conservative than most people online that I talk to.
Mhm.
And so they talked about how, say, like racism or homophobia isn't inherently conservative, right?
Mhm.
But I feel like my question for that is if you're a traditionalist, I feel like in a lot of ways you're going to be those almost by default, depending on like how far back your traditions go. Like in the case, like no, like for homophobia for me, right?
Mhm.
Because like if you say like, oh, like I'm a like Soldier was a good example of this, where he's like, he's talking about like the queers and other people like that, and this is a man like who stopped his sociological education in the 80s, right? So if I'm a traditionalist in the sense like, oh, like I'm a grandfather that like grew up and like had the peak of my adult life in the 80s, I will probably have, by modern standards, backwards opinions on gay people or think that they're bad.
Mhm.
So so I'm not trying to say that traditionalism is inherently like those things. But I feel like it's an example of what traditions you keep with you.
Yes. I mean, I think there's like a good answer for this, in that I would say that racism and homophobia are anti progressive. And I think that being anti progressive is, it's a little bit like being like a Gentile. Like it's a little bit like you have this one group and you have all these people who are not part of the group. But then the people who are not part of the group, they can be pagans or they can be Christians or they can be atheists. And so I think that like you have progressivism and then you have like homophobic, like tradcath beliefs, right? Who, I've met tradcaths who are like very explicitly non-racist because they like believe that everyone should be part of like God's kingdom.
Right.
And then I've also seen people who are like alt-righters and who believe in like racial supremacy, but like are also a fan of like gay catboys or whatever, right? And so I think both of these groups are like very far from the progressive milieu, the progressive ideology, but they can still be like very different on this sort of like one axis, or like different on like their individual
Right.
values.
Like one is like racist versus one is like homophobic, and they're not both the same thing. Say
Yeah.
how you.
Or you
Yeah.
might have like libertarians who I think are very not progressive, and they are arguing for this like federalist system where like people can go into their own communities and be like racist or homophobic in theirs, but they should have like the freedom to like smoke weed and get gay married in their own communities. And so like these are all three different ways to be anti-progressive, but are like very different. So I agree that like racism and homophobia are not inherently conservative or traditional, but I do think that they are inherently anti-progressive.
Okay. I can understand. All right. That answered my question pretty good. I guess we can bring in a Econo boy now.
Okay.
He's sewing out at me. We have to. He made okay. Actually, before another thing before he comes in, he made fun of my mustache. What do you think?
What's unbelievable? It's
You like it?
it's a good mustache. I like it.
Thank you. I think it's tight. I think it's clean. Like like it's it's good. I can grow like an actual beard, but kind of really disgusts me.
Mm.
certain way because I'm a really clean guy, and so for me, right, when I do when I have my facial hair, I need like some kind of like clean part of my face because whenever I even if I because my skincare routine, like I wash my face like every morning and night, and I have like two different types of moisturizers that I use, right? But even when I do that, if I have a beard, I'm going to start breaking out just because I'm like naturally guy. So I've started hating beards in general because I can't do that. I can maintain a mustache because like it's so much smaller, and I guess like there's not a ton of oil like directly above my lip compared to like the other like sides of my face. So like that's why I like the mustache, but I can't. I don't want to grow a full beard because it's just I can't stand that specific part. So
That's so interesting. I like mustaches, but I'm just like fascinated by like how men choose their facial hair because I feel like if I could grow facial hair and I was like wanted to do that, there's like very specific styles that I would do, and like I don't think that I would have a neck beard, but like sometimes I will see guys with neck beards, and I'm like, what is your thought process behind growing this out, or just like other kinds of facial hair that I'm like, I just don't understand it. But like, I think mustaches are cool.
I think so too. I think they're fun because you can style them. And also I agree about the neck beard thing. Whenever I do grow a beard, so my beard grows to about right here, like my Adam's apple. So when I start growing hair, it goes all the way down here. And if I ever make like if I'm on vacation or something and I want to grow my beard out or something like that, because I like being professional at the office. And sometimes I'll grow it out, but after about a week, I have to shave to about like right beneath my like jawline. Because otherwise, I'll start going crazy because I'm like, it just feels bad, it looks
Get a
bad.
beard transplant.
What
Transplant.
Is this what you came in for? Like we're having a very
This
This
serious
is the most
conversation.
important thing.
What were you guys talking about?
He
I just
predicted
jumped
that
in.
we would talk about beards, and he had a hot take on them.
I see two of my streaming buddies talking, and I'm streaming. It's like, oh, we're all streaming. Let's do it
Whoa.
together.
Oh,
you know?
you're not allowed to stream with us, or we never said you could sit with us. Okay, like what do you?
Look,
why
okay,
would you?
that's fair. Look, fair enough. Okay, but I just invited myself. That's how it works. That's how families are. You know?
It's good. It's something to do on stream.
Hey,
Yeah, exactly. I just got done talking to a Maoist, and now we're just talking whatever you guys. I mean, the title. You say you're talking about serious topics. The title. What was the title of the stream? Like talking about the boys and fucking. You guys were talking about Lord of the Rings or something.
Very serious topics.
Yeah, we were just talking about like values in media, and the boys was one example that we used, and then we talked about Arcane for a bit, and then we talked about like explicit values systems and how they're portrayed, and then like that. The last thing you saw was like us talking about the implications of different fantasy races being real world races, yeah, and like and inherent evil and this stuff. So I'm not saying this is like the most important topic right now, right? But like the hippy dippy already happened. So Taff, how was that last night? I haven't watched it. I don't watch the hippy dippy. I'll be honest. I don't watch like any like political streamers anymore, except for like every now and then I'll watch Destiny and just like his YouTube stuff when I'm driving to and from work. What was last night's conversation like?
It was a complete shit show. Like you have like Hiroshima, and then you have like modern hydrogen bombs, and like hippy dippy last night was modern hydrogen bombs.
Damn.
It was
Why? What happened?
It was just like because Rob Noor was in it, and
yeah.
Well, okay, it was Rob Noor, it was CTV, and the Conspiracy Castle guy on the right, and Rob Noor immediately came in and just decided that like he's not going to present any real arguments, but like the entire time he's going to LARP as like a pro-trans person and just say that like trans people are inherently better than cis people, and then we need to listen to trans voices. And that's like all he said, like over and over, just like derailing the conversation every time to the point where like nothing could get done. And then we had like a 20-minute argument because Conspiracy Castle, the Alex guy, said that gender is inherently sexual. So like just like saying like boy or girl, or like he said that like boys and girls sections of toys in Walmart is like sexualizing children. And like we just couldn't get over like that.
God.
So
what?
Not much was discussed.
Is he or was he?
Rob Noor was trolling, and then the conspiracy guy was going off the rails. It sounded
yeah. Well, he kept saying that like in order to define sexuality, like if you're a gay man, that includes saying that like you're a man and therefore being a man is sexual. And it's like, I kept trying to explain to him that like the man part is not what's making that definition sexual. The having sex part is what makes it like a sexual definition. And we just like could not overcome that. So I was like the only person who was willing to like argue right-wing things legitimately.
Oh, sorry. I feel like also like for a second I wasn't sure if that was like a lefty or a righty, the conspiracy guy when he talked about like because I thought for a moment he was like we can't gender children because like all toys should be gender neutral, and I was like was that like the angle that he was going with, or was it just
I don't know. I don't know. One thing that's really frustrating is like talking to people who are like playing characters, because like you can't have real conversations with them, and like everything is just immediately derailed. So like, yeah.
Are you playing a character, Taftage?
I try not to, but like inevitably, you end up playing like a little bit of a character.
I agree. Because I'm naturally a pretty bombastic guy, but like especially when I'm arguing with people, I like get very loud, like even more than I normally do. And I think that might just be natural. It's partially my response to arguments, but also just in general. But I think every streamer sort of does that. Oh
Yeah.
my god,
I'm more bombastic in real life arguments.
really? Like,
Way more.
Online's like the way to, was like the place to be bombastic, though. You know what I mean?
Nah, man. When I'm in person, I'm like, man, that's fucking stupid as fuck what you just said. Like that might be like a statement.
He's got an image to protect, which is like very calm, cool, rational.
Online, it's like when I'm talking to I'm more animated talking to my family about stuff like this.
That's fair. I remember back when my image was as a nice non hyper aggro spite filled man, and now I'm in the spite dungeon.
I vaguely remember that. Like I remember Destiny's subreddit being like, "What's going on with Hanz?" Like I thought his whole thing was being like super chill.
It's never been super chill. I've always been nice. Quote I've always been like, my mama raised me a certain way. Always been a pretty polite guy. In general, unless you fuck with me, I'm like almost like I'm like super professional. I'm always like best foot forward, like always nice in DMs, all sort of stuff. Because like that's partially just like again how I was raised, and also that's kind of how I am. But like there's like this moment like where if you cross a line with me, I'm just like fuck you, it's over. I'm gonna go nuclear about everything and everyone. Like nothing matters. And I think eventually and my online evolution was that there was always that part of me, right? I think some people saw that like in different like spots, especially when I used to do late night like Prime Kai's panels, right, where I was like constantly yelling at people. But a lot of people never saw those things, and it was eventually I kept getting like pushed like in different like places, and I started fighting with like more and more people online to the point where I was just like, fuck it, scorched earth. None of you guys deserve me at my niceness, all right? Like if I was going to like this.
What was the demon mama debate? The turning point.
It was the focal point.
I think it was the turning point because like
that
before
was totally the turning point.
Because everyone before then, like I was like there was like this probably like golden period for about 3 months where everybody loved me, right? And that wasn't even like calculated. That was just like how I was going. But eventually, if you're a political person online, eventually you're going to start fighting with people, right? Because you can't be expressly political in a space and then not like criticize people. And eventually, I just started picking more and more fights with more and more people and pissing off more and more communities to the point where I was like, okay, like, and then more recently I was fighting with Destiny more, so his community also turned on me.
Which I enjoyed that. I thought you did like good talking to him.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that too. I still respect him. But now it's like I would say that I'm kind of in this spot where there's no oasis for me anymore. Where it's like I have my friends online now, but I don't really have say community allies anymore. You know what I mean? Where before there was like this broad-based thing where like, oh, like everyone liked Hanz, and eventually the lefties started moving away. And then I started picking fights with other liberals for personal reasons. And then so like push people away for that. And then now I'm trying to burn all my bridges with all my conservative friends. You know, I
Nice. Yeah.
gotta go for the trifecta. You're a big dumbhead, Taff. All right.
Oh no.
Yeah. And your takes on media are shit. You're just coping. All right. Like just
Bridge burned, destroyed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great conservative values in media. Okay. Fucking Fast Five. I'm thinking about family right now.
It's all
right?
about family.
What's more traditional and conservative than that, all right? All these, it's just like doing superhero movies with your family. That's like all the Fast movies are at this point, all right?
I think modern media is famously anti-progressive, for sure.
That's like...
If I were to describe it with one word, it would be anti-progressive. Hyphenated.
How do you feel about, I think this is probably more progressive value. In regards to family stuff, I would say there are a lot of like good, more modern family stories, and a lot of it is about the relationship of parents and kids. But a lot of those stories are about like the parents accepting the children, right?
Mm-hmm.
I very much, or sometimes the children seeing their parents as people, right?
Yeah.
But I guess you could say like from in an traditionalist lens, there are very few stories. I can't even like name one off the top of my head like in the last 5 years where it's about say the child kowtowing to the parent like and fulfilling like their role as like the dutiful thing, which is weird, right? Because for me,
not very many Confucian stories for sure.
Yeah, well, I consider myself like a pretty like a family guy, and that like I like taking care of my parents. I like visiting my family. Like if my family needs something from me, I'm gonna like try and like fulfill that. But I guess that's not really it's not portrayed in that sort of same sense.
Have you guys ever seen Never Have I Ever, the Mindy Kaling show?
I have not.
All right, so I'm revealing a little bit about myself. So it's my guilty pleasure TV show. Never Have I Ever is about so it's Mindy Kaling's show, and it's about the main character is like an Indian teenage girl, and it's kind of a coming of age story, I guess you could say. It's kind of sitcom-y, but it's not a live audience kind of thing. It's like I'm trying to think of a show. It's like Modern Family kind of style thing, but it's only one family. And one interesting part in the show was they talk about, I think it was maybe I think there's 2 seasons of it. I think it was the first season. They talk about how they're going to this like big Diwali sort of event in their local community or whatever, and they're Hindu Indian people, and they talk about how oh yeah, there's this one girl there, and she married a Muslim guy, and like, geez, you know, what a crazy person that is, and like they talk about how she, you know, they show and talk about how she's like really socially ostracized, and I'm expecting the whole show to be like, oh, but you know, she overcame that, and like she doesn't care about all those crazy people like that, and you know, she's happy with her husband, and she starts talking to the main character, like the teenage girl or whatever, and she's like, so how did it work out, like marrying this Muslim dude? And she's like, honestly, it worked out terribly because we're divorced now, and basically my whole family doesn't like me anymore, and you can see how people in my community treat me. So I mean, I don't know if it was a good decision. And I was like, wow, I was not expecting a show to take that position.
And that's interesting, right?
You know,
that like
that is interesting.
It makes you think. And I wish that we had more media that like was willing to go in a little bit different of a direction. Because I think that like I've also had the experience of like watching media and thinking that it's going to go in one direction and it goes in another. And I'm really pleasantly surprised. Because it just injects like an added level of nuance to a conversation that often doesn't get like a lot of nuance in mainstream media.
Avtaj's favorite show is what was that show called? Like Welcome Home Hitler or something? It was like the Hitler sitcom.
I don't know this.
Oh
wait, Look Who's Back? That movie?
Hans, do you know what I'm talking about?
No, but
Hitler sitcom. There was a sitcom that was produced. Heil, Honey, I'm Home. This is a real thing.
What?
Okay. There was a sitcom, and it was like How Did I Meet Your Mother, but like Hitler edition. They had a live studio audience, and it was like Hitler was the main character, It's called Heil Honey, I'm Home.
I'm looking at it right now. This is from like 1990. What the fuck?
This is a real thing. And it's Adolf, and it got canceled after one episode. So
I mean, I can't. That's pretty funny.
It's insane that these people produced this show. I'm just looking at the wiki page. Apparently, they planned an 8-episode first season, but apparently 7 episodes are lost to history because only the first episode was aired after an incredible outrage.
Give me the Hitler show. Also, no, are you insinuating that Taft, just because she's a conservative, that Hitler is her favorite show? I understand it being her favorite politician, but like she might have unique media tastes, like it's not
right. Maybe I'll surprise you.
Oof.
She's one of the homies, all right. She's our Biden person, all right.
So true.
Are you oh gosh, yeah, Taft, how are you feeling about the Republican primary? Do you have like any people that you'd actually that you are interested in running? Like not because I understand like right now it's like 99.9% either Trump or DeSantis, but like if you could pick a Republican, who would you want to run?
I mean, I don't know. I don't think I have like a super interesting take. I'll have to like see who is choosing to run and if like there are any standouts. I think the general like sentiment though is that like Trump is not like a super serious candidate, at least in like the more right-wing circles that I'm in, where he's like, he seemed to have a lot of promise early on and then just sort of like proved to not actually be like that competent. So I don't know. I think that like all the excitement is around DeSantis right now.
Fair, because I feel like DeSantis has a lot of the same like on paper policy goals of Trump, but I would say he's been considerably more competent at getting those like handled in Florida. So although I guess you could also say that he has the benefit of a very supportive state house, but I'm not. But
well, he's also like he's a politician and he served in the military, and he seems like a little bit like more controlled. He's not like the sort of like bombastic, narcissistic personality.
He can get the same kind of people who wanted like Trump's messaging, but he wouldn't push away the people who are like want like someone who's more buttoned down. Like he could potentially like bridge that gap, right? That kind of thing.
And like a big problem with Trump too is he just had like no control over his own White House and his own staff. And there was constant churn of people getting hired and then being fired for like not being loyal enough. And it just seemed like sort of chaos from the outside where there was like very little competency in getting things done.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm in general like not a big fan of the Republican Party. So
that's fair.
If you could pick any person to run Taftosh, who would it be?
Oh, any person?
Just any living person.
Oh, Tom Hanks. All right.
I would just
not you, Hanz. I asked Taftosh. All right.
I would appoint Elon Musk as dictator CEO of America. And
Jesus Christ!
That's who I would have run, and I would tell him to get rid of the democratic process. That's what I would do. And I would just have him run America for profit, for his own benefit.
I wouldn't. I'll be honest. This is a personal beef of mine. Okay, I wouldn't hate him as much as I do if he just didn't share like shitty Reddit memes that he stole from other people. Okay, or I feel like he's a regular guy who thinks he's like really clever because he's been wildly successful, which is fair, right?
Yeah, he probably is like wildly clever.
Yeah, but like his cleverness, like his tweets are not clever. Okay, like to be fair, my tweets aren't anything to write home about either. You've seen them today, but like, come on, this guy. Like, let me see some. Let's see.
He's just like a funny meme guy. Yeah, he has like the humor of like a 15-year-old boy who's like discovered edgy memes.
That's literally him, though. I don't like. What is your favorite cheese? I will keep supporting Dogecoin. Like,
yeah. I just think that like one thing that CEOs really know how to do is to like delegate and to hire the right people, and that's like 90% of leadership is being able to delegate responsibility and offload responsibility onto people who are like very competent, and also knowing how to like fire them when they fail. And that's something that like there's not a lot of flexibility within institutional government processes to like hold people directly responsible for failures and to like quickly remove them from office if they're doing poorly, and then also to like replace them with competent people. So there's just like, in general, there's a lot of bureaucracy which slows down decision making and ends up with worse decisions in the end.
I think the problem is that the CEOs know how to hire people for like a specific task, right? The business that they're involved in, right?
That's
and
true.
This was the selling point of Trump, was that like, I'm a businessman, like I know how to hire people and I'll delegate really well, and
But
like I know
government
how to
doesn't
run
work that
big
way.
organizations. Right, exactly. So like you might know how to hire like a good VP of sales, but like you don't know how to hire a good attorney general.
And
They're
that's
totally different things.
That's the reason why I don't say that like I don't think that Elon Musk would be a good president, because I don't think that like I think that so much of the presidential office is like very deeply constrained by the political process and the environment that it exists in. Like presidents are not dictators, and they can't just like, sign all of their beliefs into law. And so, whether or not the president is Republican or Democrat, the system that we've built up, like very intentionally, is a system that's built to like prevent any one group or person from just like dominating and implementing their decisions. So I think a lot of it's going to be, fairly similar. And it's why like I'm not really, when someone says that like Obama is going to enslave white people, or that like DeSantis is going to turn America into Hungary, or like all of these sorts of predictions, or that like Biden's going to, institute communism. And maybe that's like the left is saying that, or the right is saying that, or the left is saying that Biden's not doing enough. Like the political reality is just that like these people are so constrained by the environment that they exist in that these things aren't really possible as long as we have political institutions.
Got you. And I agree in the sense that I think political institutions are really important, but I am nervous about their staying power, especially with, I would say, Supreme Court stuff recently, but also the process of appointing the court, and then the election that like in 2020. I'm very afraid that we are going to keep, and maybe you can like assuage me on this, that we're going to keep like spiraling slowly, not in that like some sort of grand civil war kind of way, but in that our institutions will slowly stop working over the next 20 plus years, because we're going down a path where if it's expedient to undermine an institution, party is going to do that. And as a good, as a good progressive, I don't want Democrats to bend institutions in the same way that I think I see Republicans doing. In the sense, like
you don't want them to pack the court.
I do want them to pack the court, but here's why.
You motherfucker.
Right? I know, here's part of my problem, right? I personally can't get past this, right? I don't know, as a good institutional supporting liberal progressive, how to maintain institutions if one party is trying to bend those institutions. Like one of my biggest frustrations was, say, with Destiny, right? When people bring up, say, Republican gerrymandering. He'll say, "Oh, they've been doing that for 50 years." I'm like, "Okay, so they've been trying to undermine an institution for 50 years." Like, I really dislike that, and like, I don't want my response to be, "Oh, Democrats should do that instead," right? Because, but if you don't do that, you're essentially ceding a moral, you're ceding a legislative or institutional victory to the opposition for a moral victory, and to me, I find that extremely unsatisfying. And when I see that, I'm not sure what to do other than slowly hope that eventually one side will stop like pulling us towards that, right? Because I agree with you that packing the court is essentially the nuclear option. We're essentially saying, all right, you've bent our institutions, we're fucking bending institutions. It would have been like the equivalent of, say, Obama when they wouldn't give him a hearing on Merrick Garland if he just, say, appointed him. Right? He's acting Supreme Court justice. and I'm going to do this, right? Because there was a constitutional crisis because we didn't know what to do when they refused to have a hearing for him, right? Do I think that was bad? I would say yes, but what was he supposed to do in there? And if that happens again, right, with a Republican in office, or in this case, like say, like DeSantis wins in 2024, and in 2026, someone else dies, right, and it's time to fill, but Dems say no, then we absolutely keep making our institutions like more and more undermined. And I don't know what to do with that, because every instance where someone can benefit from doing it, they're going to want to do it, right? We're essentially asking people that can technically do these things that aren't explicit breaks in our institutions, but definitely bending them, to not bend them when it's explicitly allowed. And we're telling, in my case, I'd be asking my side to not do that when it explicitly benefits them, right? I really struggle with that, because for me, it's like if someone punches me, I want to punch them back, right? I don't want someone to be like, Hanz, violence is wrong. You know that, right? I'm like, yes, I know that, but like, am I supposed to like wait for them to hit me again?
Well, Hanz, this is like what we were talking about with Arcane, where like one person does something and it provokes a reaction from the other person. And like both sides are trying to grab power, and it's destroying themselves and the environment that they exist in. And so like, this is really just like political entropy, where like the desire to corrupt institutions forces the other side to also want to corrupt institutions. And the end result is that like they just sort of devolve. And I think that we have this like general understanding that like politicizing these institutions is not good. So like,
right.
If you politicize the Supreme Court, like in theory, the Supreme Court is just this like neutral arbiter that is meant to make sure that things are applying to the Constitution, and it's not meant to be like partisan, and you're not meant to select justices based on their political history, right? In theory, that's how it's supposed to work. And in theory, drawing of districts is not meant to be like, well, this is not entirely true, but like in maybe a better world, it would not be meant to be like a partisan political thing. But I think that like really what we're talking about is that like there is a certain level of like democratic oversight in these environments that has resulted in people having like a great deal of incentive in forcing them, bending them to their whim. And I agree that like it's very problematic, but I think that like it's an inevitable result of like institutional rot, and the better solution is just like stronger institutions from the beginning, or like restarting or re-strengthening institutions in some fundamental structural way that prevents that from happening in the future.
I completely agree with you. My only issue is that I'm not sure how to accomplish the restructuring. And this is going to sound like extremely cynical, but I think most people would agree to this, where it's like if you have two sides, and like Republicans might feel this way too, right? So like this could be like, I'm not even going to say like what specific one that is. If someone said, hey, we are edging towards political entropy, and one side's likely going to come out on top, right? And if one side is like pushing towards the entropy and one side doesn't, eventually the side that's like pulling all the strings and pulling for entropy is probably going to win that fight.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about like a civil war or anything like that. I'm talking about just say like to control the political institutions. And it's, as a good liberal, it's extremely difficult to be like, all right, we can't respond, but we have to like, again, like you said, like there's no good answer for this.
What is like the result if like institutions fall apart and everything is basically like direct democracy, or like
I mean, we're sort of fucked, right? Like if we get to like direct democracy, we're pretty fucked. If we get to like say an autocratic dictatorship, where only like one side like is like in control.
Well, no, I don't think those are equally fucked, right? Like
no. I agree, kind of, but one is worse than the other one, right? Which is why like people have asked me, like they're like, if you have to tip your finger on like the scale for like one versus the other, I'm gonna pick the one that I like more, right? Like if I had to pick, say, this could sound terrible, right? Like a liberal dictatorship versus a conservative dictatorship, I'll probably pick the liberal one. And I think anyone who says otherwise would probably be lying. But my issue is I don't want to get to that point ever, right? I don't even want to have that be a consideration. But philosophically, I understand like people have called me like a coward because they're like, "Oh, you care about institutions. When is violence okay, Hans?" They're like, what if people like start rounding up like gay people for being gay? I'm like, yeah, of course. If someone starts rounding you up for like your sexuality, I think you're completely justified in like defending yourself, right? The only issue is that it's not exactly happening yet, right? Or happening, or even like will happen, right? I think that'd be like a massive.
We're not
stretch.
on the cusp of like a trans genocide.
I think we can say that there are legislation being passed that will absolutely hurt trans people, absolutely make it more difficult, like to transition earlier, like, and those things are, I would say, are extremely like damaging to trans people long term. I'm not sure if I would be comfortable calling that like an explicit genocide. I think that's just like, I would say that's bigoted legislation that's going to harm people. But if we're going to talk about the genocide stuff, genocide's a very loaded term for a good reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because genocide can mean, like, when we're talking about genocide, are we talking about, say, cultural genocide? Are we talking about, smallpox blankets, Native American style genocide? Are we talking, Holocaust, right? Like, when someone says genocide, it can invoke any number of those things. And so I don't see that as the same. I'd be comfortable calling it a genocide if I saw like a bill that got passed that said, we're going to round up all trans people and force them like to detransition in camps, right? Like at that point, I'm like, fuck it. Like you guys can fight all you want. Like I think that's, at that point, I would say violence is entirely justified for trans people, like and like their allies in that regard.
I mean, I think it's another example of concept creep, right? Where like you start with this concept and it's meaningful because it has boundaries. And when you say something's genocide and it has like limited, very defined boundaries that encompass some of the worst acts in human history, and then you can like legitimately call something a genocide, then that's a very serious accusation. But as people begin to use the word to include more and more things that stretch the definition for their own political gain, it becomes less and less useful. And so I think that like, in my opinion, like I think it makes sense to like reserve the word genocide for like a very serious set of things that don't include like limiting HRT access to 18 years or older when like we don't have any hard evidence that like lack of HRT results in more suicides. We don't have that evidence. Yet like that gets pushed as something that's like, should be taken as fact and therefore proof of genocide. And it's just ridiculous.
Would you say, even if it's not like even if it's not like suicide rates,
Mm-hmm.
What about like say like rates of like quality of life, right? I think I again like as a trans person, right? When did you, if you don't mind like saying, like when did you start transitioning?
I came out when I was 14.
Okay, and when did you start medically transitioning?
When
Or, like,
I was 15.
Okay. And do you feel like you're a lot better off because of like that earlier transition?
Maybe. So like, however I say this, it's going to be like a little bit sticky business because I think that like, in my case, it's not like totally clear that like mentally I'm better off having transitioned than if I didn't. I think that I am, but like it's like close where like I've dealt with like a lot of struggles as a result of transition that I would not have had to deal with otherwise. And I've dealt with like a continued struggle with dysphoria, which has abated at times, and especially abated like within the past year or 2 years. But that dysphoria, I think, was something that like was not dramatically reduced by HRT. And when I look at like on balance, whether or not I benefited or did not benefit from HRT, I think that I'm in a better place mentally, but it came at like a massive cost. And the benefit is like not huge. And so I think that like if, go back to me as a 14-year-old, if I'm looking at where I am now, or looking at where I was like a year, 2 years ago, and saying, is it worth it to go through all of this in order to end up like slightly better off mentally? I'm not sure I would have taken that gamble. And I still think it like was ultimately, it turned out good for me. Like I'm not going to detransition now because it would be worse. But like, even in my case, I think it's like a little bit of an edge case. And I don't think that like we should take one person's experience as like
Right.
indicative
I
of
was
everyone.
I was just asking your perspective because I think in regards to like the detransitioning thing, it's like very small amounts of trans people like actually
Mhm.
detransition, right? Where it's like something like 5% or less. I can't like, and so it seems like once it's started, y'all seem pretty happy with it, or at least
I
like happy
don't
enough
know a
that
lot of happy trans women. I'm going to be honest.
oh, okay, like the like I understand that like being trans is like has its own like set of struggles, but I think like I would say for most like trans like women or men that like if someone said we'll take your hormones right now, I would say most of them would be like this is like going to be worse for me than otherwise, right?
I agree. I think they would say that, but like I don't think that's very good evidence because like if you were to tell like anorexics like you need to gain weight, they'll probably tell you like no, they don't want to. So like just asking someone what they think is like beneficial for them in the moment is maybe not the best indicator, and which is like
What about
why
the
I'd prefer to look at like objective statistics on suicide rates, in which case we don't really see like an objective, clear, evidence that HRT is reducing them.
there is though, right? There's a lot of evidence that gender affirming care reduces like suicidal ideation and like mental
Well,
health
if you
struggles and stuff
ask
like that,
them,
right?
so like if you survey trans people, they'll say this is true. But like if you survey essential oils people, they'll say that like essential oils are great for them. So like in some
But
sense, you have to look at like hospitalizations and whatnot. And in which
Well, that's
case,
not no, but that's a worse methodology though, because you're not controlling for anything, right? Like
what do you
it's a lot
mean?
harder to at least,
I
right?
mean, the surveys aren't, they're also not controlling for anything. So like that's another big problem is they don't have control groups. They just ask
They do
like,
though.
have
I
you?
mean, maybe some do, but like I know that the one on trans youth that is like often cited to prove that like HRT is really beneficial for trans youth. That one doesn't have a control group, and there's like this big meta-analysis of all the trans studies. Maybe some of them have control groups, but usually the position that I hear brought up from people who are like in the field is they say that having a control group is just unethical and it wouldn't get past the medical ethics board. So they
What do you
say
mean
that
by
like
control group? Maybe I'm
as
not
far as like
understanding.
you have like an experimental treatment like HRT, and then you have like a placebo or like control group that is not on HRT, and you compare
Yeah,
their
you're talking
benefits.
about like a clinical control group where
Yeah.
like an experimental design. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, I don't think, and I get like from the ethics perspective, obviously it would be weird to be like, here's a group of kids where we purposely didn't give them gender
Mhm.
affirming care, and here's a group of kids where we did, right? And so that would have some ethical implications that would be pretty dicey. But yeah, I think that it seems like the broad base of a survey of research that I've seen is just that. Well, yeah, I mean, when you do surveys and when you look at like longitudinal data across long time panel data, I should say, it seems to be the case that people who have accepting environments, gender affirming care,
Okay, but you're
one or
already
both of
getting
those
into
things.
confounding variables of like the accepting
No,
environments.
well, no, not really, right? Because again, it's a holistic solution to a complex problem, right? And so it seems like when you identify oftentimes those things individually, and when you do the regressions and find that they have different and disparate effects, that those things individually do have positive effects associated with the mental health outcomes of trans youth.
Well,
And
there's two problems here, which is one, the confounding variables, two, the lack of like a clinical control variable. I guess there's like three, and three is like the survey study design. So like if you look at like again like the conclusions that researchers come to when they look at like the totality of evidence, they will say things that like confounding variables is a problem because we don't know if the mental health outcomes are improving because everyone around them is like accepting, or if it's like the actual like medical changes that are happening in their brain and on their body that are causing improvements. And so like this is anecdotal, but like some of the most happy trans women that I know and the most like mentally healthy, successful ones are ones that have built a community around them that really accepts them for who they are and don't actually worry so much about the medical transition. They're not concerned with getting like the next big surgery or, the hormone effects. They've like accepted that their body is going to be a certain way and they've just tried to build a good community around that. And vice
I
versa, some of the least happy ones I know are the ones that are obsessed with getting surgery and, you know, surround themselves with people who are going to
Yeah.
reinforce that.
Well, but it might also be the case that the ones that are the most obsessed are the ones that have most of, because gender dysphoria is
Yeah,
a spectrum,
this is
right?
true.
Like, so I don't know. I think that, without, you didn't address really the clinical design thing, but saying that the lack of a sort of clinical experimental design is a reason to, necessarily be skeptical of all this research. I think you'd almost throw out all social science research, which I don't think would be very reasonable to do. And, so I don't know. I think,
Is this like a thing? No, but I guess
I mean, a lot
Yeah.
of social science research is just
Bad.
terrible.
Yes.
So,
No, I agree. Some of it suffers from that, but there's quasi-experimental apologies. There's quasi-experimental designs and statistical techniques that can get you to causation with panel data, and those are seemingly the best trans studies that I've seen, right?
so I
And
do
that's,
think it is evidence. Like, I don't think that it's good to ban HRT, and I do think it's good to prescribe HRT. I just think that, like, there is a level of skepticism that is warranted, and the evidence is not super strong. It is evidence, right? And it's better than like not having evidence. So I'm not going to say that like we shouldn't have survey studies, because like we should, and they do provide us some use. But like I just think we need to be like understanding of their limitations.
So I
yeah,
guess
that's fair enough.
So I guess like my final question on this, right, is if we only have like these surveys, and if it's medically like morally unacceptable not to like get like not give people hormones, right? Like if they're asking for it, right? For these like studies, is it possible? I guess I'm sort of caught up on the quality of life thing that you talked about, where I feel like there are more mental things beyond just like whether you're suiciding yourself or not, right? Where that's like like how you feel like in your general like day or vibe, and how the people that like might be most happy are the people that like are more accepted. And I would say like not this isn't shorthand, but I think these are correlated. Where people who this is like the passing privilege thing, right? Where it's like if you pass better, more people on average will be more accepting of you, right? Like if you say like look at Blair White or you on the street, most people like probably wouldn't even be able to tell if like whether you're trans or not, right? And they would default to you like like treating you as a woman, as opposed to having to be like, oh, like, hi, I'm X, my pronouns are X, please treat me as this, right? And I think for a lot of people, the hormones provide that in a roundabout way, where it's like, oh, hey, you physiologically change a little bit or a lot of it, depending on like how the hormones hit you, and that makes more people on average more comfortable with referring to you as the gender that you are, right? I think that seems like a no-brainer to me, in the sense that if it wasn't the case for that, I just don't understand why so many people would, even people who are like kind of like go back and forth on your experience like you, choose to still use hormones, right? Because I guess like in a way that we like could experiment with this is say take someone like you and go off hormones for a couple of years and see how you feel. But I think I would say, I'm not trying to like attack you, but I'm saying like there's probably a reason why you don't want to do that, right?
Right.
Like,
I think that I would feel worse. So like the only reason that I'm like sort of even skeptical about my own position is because I've put like so much effort into transitioning, right? So I'm sort of comparing like, well, now that I've done everything, like there's no reason to go back, because I think that I would feel worse. But I'm also not sure that like the benefit that I've gotten is worth all of the effort. And like probably it is. Like I think that like where I'm at in my life, it is worth it. But like I would just say it's like not obvious, right? That that's the case for like everybody all the time, or even me. Like there have been times where like, again, like I ultimately fall on one side of this, but like it's not like super clear cut is all I'm saying.
I guess I understand like where you're coming from on that there's potential differences. I would probably just fall harder on the sense that it's most likely helping day to day, at least for the people who are more not like making fun of like the trenders, right? But like the people who are actually like experiencing dysphoria, you probably feel better if your body's more congruent with like with what your image is, right? I guess because my partner's is like non-binary, right? And they do experience dysphoria, And they struggle with that because they personally are like, I don't know, like what hormones am I is like, is a non-binary person experiencing dysphoria supposed to take? Because they feel like they feel incongruent like in a feminine body, right? But there were times where they got into cross-dressing where they would wore masculine clothes, but that also triggered dysphoria.
Mhm.
So it was like, what are you supposed to do with it? I'm not like asking for an answer. I'm just like, I feel like there are when you can alleviate dysphoria with like say medical assistance, it's or like even like the day-to-day like functioning, it's probably more helpful. And I guess like could we I don't know, like it helped you when you like now where you are.
Mhm.
I feel like the big danger is that there's going to be a lot of quality of life removal for a lot of for trans people, because I've seen like the 4chan boards and like shit like that where people are like, oh, like I wasn't able to transition medically until I was like 23 and I'm fucked because I have like giant man shoulders and hands and stuff like that. And it's like if they had gotten it when they were 14 and they probably would be better off, like at least like mentally, right? But again, like I realize that like that's a hard thing. It
Maybe.
just seems. I know it's a maybe. It just feels intuitive to me that if these people are still trans through the dysphoria, like from like X to like this amount of years, it almost feels like it would have been better to give them the like hormone treatment as soon as possible once they were sure, right? And I'm like, and you can obviously like have the medical gatekeeping thing that Demon Mama memes about is stupid, but I think like the way we fix that is having more access to these sort of care providers or the psychologists that can find like like whether someone's like actually trans and in need of these things as soon as possible, right? Because like it's like the Wild West with a lot of fucking people. Like they're finding hormones online and they're just like mailing them to themselves, and it's do yourself HRT. And a lot of people I've talked to have said like this is kind of necessary for me because there's not the infrastructure in place for me to do this like the right way, right? And like as an advocate for that, I'd want to provide that avenue as much as possible, because it's hard for me to criticize like the do yourself HRT people when they don't have other like resources. I can meme on like the fucking insulin do it yourself people because like we have fucking insulin for that reason. Like let's not go like back to that. But if we don't currently have the infrastructure, it's hard for me to be, I guess, as frustrated with the DIY HRT people, if that makes sense.
I do think that makes sense.
Do you get your, again, like these are like personal questions you don't have to answer. Do you get your hormones from a specific doctor, or do you order them?
I just get them from my general practitioner.
Oh, okay. Like as part of like a health insurance thing. So like
Yeah.
they're prescribed. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'm like any like doctor can just like prescribe you. But like endocrinologists will know more and be able to like manage it better for you. There's this like very well studied phenomenon in like mental health where you can have a person with a phobia, like a phobia of arachnids. And we know that like the best way to help this person with the phobia is to expose them to it in small doses and to allow their brain to realize that it's not as bad or as scary as they think it is. And a real danger is that if someone has a fear of something, they can avoid that thing and allow it to build up in their head to the point where they expect it to be much, much worse than it is. And so I've had this experience with transition where I don't want to go out into the world. I don't want to like get coffee or do fun things because in my head I'm building up and building up like how bad the experience will be to like be seen as male by people. And I'm like imagining people like clocking me and whatnot. And so what we know is that like the best solution is to expose people to those fears and to help them manage them that way. So I think that like one potential problem, and I'm not saying this is like the cause of dysphoria, but I think it makes dysphoria worse for people, is when in trans communities, trans people say things that like the most important thing for you is just HRT, and HRT is how you improve your mental condition. And without HRT, you're going to commit suicide, or there's going to be a mass suicide epidemic for trans people. What that does, I think, is it builds up the fear in people's minds, where you're basically telling the arachnophobe that if you get in front of a spider, the spider is going to kill you, right? And the reality is that's not true. If you're a trans person and you go off HRT, you can probably manage that. We don't have, like, we would know if lack of HRT led to mass suicide. We would have, like, abundant evidence for that. We don't have abundant evidence for that. So what we probably know is that, like, HRT has a positive effect, but you are, as a trans person, not like a fragile piece of glass. Like, you can handle bad things in your life and you can manage bad feelings. And it's possible to do this without HRT or without having the perfect medical transition that results in you passing. And the reason why that messaging, I think, is important for trans people is because it recenters the conversation to be more about things that, they can really control, right? You can't always control your passing. You can pursue HRT and surgery, but, like, a lot of times the reality is that, like, HRT is not going to make you pass. That's, like, the hard truth of it. But you can control your environment. You can develop friendships with people, and you can surround yourself with accepting people who really support you. And so I think that, like, focusing the conversation on that and saying that, like, trans people actually have a great deal of agency and ability to, like, improve their mental condition by managing their environment. That might be, like, a better message than saying, if you don't have HRT, you're going to commit suicide. That's a very hard conversation to have because there's an enormous amount of nuance, but I just in general think that, like, the messaging can be sort of destructive.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the difference, though, between, like, an individual person's advice and, like, how you might structure policy surrounding the issue.
Yeah.
Right? Because, it's like when people say, like, oh my goodness, we need to connect Black people with, like, mentors, and we need to tell them the problems with being in gangs and stuff like that, and and that's one way to address the sort of inequalities in the Black community. And it's like, well, obviously, if I was talking to, if I was mentoring a Black kid from, like, a bad neighborhood or something, I would tell him, yeah, obviously you want to take your grades pretty seriously, and obviously stay out of trouble, don't do drugs, that kind of stuff. But that type of messaging from a policy person doesn't really help, right? At least it doesn't seem to me convincing that governments can fairly effectively create, like, culture campaigns that change discourse significantly. It seems like policy changes discourse from a policymaker's perspective, right? And at the same time that telling that same kid, like, oh, here's what you need. You need a $15 hour minimum wage. You need free education. That's not very helpful for that person either, right? And so there is a disconnect between policy and individual discussions, but it doesn't mean that they're, like, incongruent when you give both of those sort of recommendations simultaneously, right? So,
Yeah, and, like, again, I think it's bad to ban HRT. So, like, I had this discussion last night on Hippy Tippy where I'm like, I don't think this is a good idea. And, like, that was the position that I was coming out on in that argument or in that debate. Because, like, ultimately, when it comes to, like, the policy level, I don't think that, like, the government should be mandating these sorts of things. I think that, like, experts need to decide and figure out what is appropriate or not appropriate. And that needs to, like, slot into existing legislation regarding medical efficacy and medical ethics. And you shouldn't have, like, random people deciding that, like, well, I think trans people are gross, therefore I'm going to, like, vote to ban their healthcare, which is, like, I think realistically what's happening. And it's, like, nonsense. It's totally unrelated to science. So yeah, like, on a policy platform or on a policy perspective, I'm empathetic to that.
I guess I have to. I have to leave soon.
Okay, yeah.
But
Wow.
it's 5 o'clock. It mostly goes, like, fuck a conaway, right? I want to leave before this bastard
Wow.
gets to say
He's
too many
scared
more
of me.
words.
That's what it is.
What am I afraid of? You're a fucking blue E, okay? Sorry, a white E on a blue background. You're
Look,
white
okay, I'll
as
have you
fuck.
know, Hans. I'll have you fucking know, Hans. Okay, I am about to order farmer carry implements, and I'm gonna put them in my garage, and I'm gonna get big forearms, and then we're gonna have our boxing match. All right, that's what's gonna happen. All right, it's only going to take me 3 to 5 years to train and get ready. All right,
Oh,
it's going to be a fun time though.
years. I believe in you, buddy. You can do it. Okay, between you and me, all right.
You can do anything you set your mind to.
I mean, actually, like, I might not be fat in 5 years, so we'll see where we go with that. I still need to fix myself there. I got about I know I actually have probably about like if I lean down to 15% body fat, I'd probably be closer to about 225. I just have some chonk around my gut because it's actually very frustrating for me.
Are you fat, Hans? You don't look fat at all. Do you have like that skinny face but fat body kind of thing?
No, like
I think
I
it's more
actually
muscular.
Okay, so it's like okay, so I'm what you call like a big guy, right?
Thick
So like
man.
I work out really consistently. I'm pretty big, pretty strong, like all that sort of stuff. But I also eat like a motherfucker, and I don't do this as much, but I like my alcohol too, right? And so my fat. If you look at me like this, you're like, oh, like where's the fat on Hans? Like he's just like a thick guy. He's big on the shoulders. But then my stomach, look at it. There's like no visible abs. There's like a little like protrusion,
so.
right? Like I'm not exactly cut. You know what I mean? It's
like a farmer's body though. That's like not. I wouldn't call that fat.
I know it's a farmer's body, right? Like like big muscles, but also like a good amount of like I'm not I'm not a bodybuilder, right? I'm just like
Corn
generic.
fed.
Yeah, fuck you. So
That's
if I
like
really
the word for it though, they say you got your corn fed.
stop it. But most of it I would say is I'm trying to cut down a little bit of weight. Mostly, like I said, because I gained a little bit too much weight over vacation. I actually feel the difference. Like when I feel I ran a 5K a couple months ago, and I leaned down to about 240 for that. For the 5K, just because like when I'm running, you can feel the extra weight when you're moving or you're trying to move quickly. And I knew it was bad for me. And then so when I did my first, I ran 1.5 miles about 3 days ago, and that was the first time I've ran in about 2 months. And fuck, that was hard because I was 260, hadn't done any cardio. It took me 15 minutes to run 1.5 miles. It was terrible. But it's just an athletic thing for me. I know what it's like to move around when I'm 240 versus 250 versus 260, and it all feels different, and it feels bad when you're trying to run at 260. So, also like long term, I'm a hefty guy, and I want to be there for my family and my partner. So I'm trying to take my cardio more seriously and start early because like it's one thing to like try and get back in shape in your 40s, and it's better because I'm 24. It's better just to be like a fit guy my entire life. So. Just want to take that.
Halftime she's got the weights in the background, both pumping iron. Everyone's getting ripped.
I'm super strong.
I do have. You are strong. Also, yeah, someone said beer belly and Tasha. Like, yes, I do have a beer belly. Okay, like I'm not ashamed. I love fucking food. I love my drink. All right, I'm a Viking. Okay, this is what we were built for. Okay, there's not a lot of abs on the Vikings. Okay, like they came in, they're fucking big old men with those big shields. All right, they'd steal they'd fuck your wife, and then they'd take all your shit. Okay, that's what I'm designed for. Okay, and for farming, I am a farm boy as well. Okay, that's what.
There we go.
Baling hay, killing cows.
Functional strength.
Committing genocide.
I'm not function. That's also bullshit. Okay,
That's bullshit.
Like lifting weights in the gym does not make you good at like lifting stuff. Like I have like my uncle, right? He's 55 now. And this dude never goes to the gym. You'll see him just fucking flipping like 200-pound tires and just like and he lost a hand in a tractor accident. And this guy just fucking like picking up like 50-pound bales of hay and just like yeeting them on like 6 feet into the air.
Just
like
one-handed.
Yeah, one-handed. Like when I was a kid, he would do that. I'm like, what the fuck, Kurt? How are you so strong? And it's just a different vibe. Same with my grandpa. And he never really he started losing strength towards the end of his life because he was getting old, right? But my grandpa was like had fucking farmer strength until he was 65-ish. That's when he started like to fail. So also my family is like normally pretty big and athletic. Like both my grandfather and my uncle, at least my mother's side, my grandfather and my uncle were both college like D1 athletes. So it was like I'm not a D1 athlete to be completely clear. Okay, I'm just a big fat guy. So
there you go.
It's just sorry, that was a weird tangent.
Politics.
But anyway, Taft, if you could rate my mustache on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think?
You get closer to the camera.
Yeah. Wait. Oh yeah. I forgot. I was looking at the wrong one. I was looking at my camera.
The fact that you have to get closer already makes it below a 5. Let's be real. You know?
I think it's pretty good.
I think I wish I could have a little bit more like thickness on the top.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like right here-ish.
Yeah, you got like a policeman's mustache. You know.
A little
you!
bit. I mean, it could be more like solid to be a policeman's mustache.
Right.
Say
I've
probably
only-
solid 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10.
Thank you. Yeah.
8 out of 10.
Yeah.
It'll thicken up a little bit. I've only had it for about 4 weeks, so give it. I remembered being scrawnier when I was like 3 weeks old. So I'm waiting for like the top. You know, like a mustache is like full grown when like the top hairs of like around your nose get to the same length as the ones on the bottom, and I just haven't gotten there yet. But I do have. What do you think about the sides? I thought about trimming the sides because like they go beyond like the edges of my mouth. But I'm really nervous. Like if I cut any off the sides, it'll turn like a Hitler stash. I just don't want to.
No, I
don't
think
want
that makes sense because it's like hanging over a little bit. So I do think you
Yeah.
could like, or maybe like just trim it off like here-ish.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like just like the like keep on the lip because also
Yeah.
like you know, so like how like the edges are like on the sides of the mouth are just a little bit taller than like the general. Like that's just where like the insertions of my hair are. So it's like it's not. I didn't try to do that on purpose. It's like it goes like big on the nose and then a little and then back up at the ends.
Like a Pringles can mustache.
Like
You could lean into that, and that could be a good move if you made it more like handlebar.
I would. Oh my god, I would fucking love to have a handlebar.
Right?
That
Would be sick.
People make fun of like immaculately groomed mustaches and beards, but I think they look sick. Okay, everyone's
Yeah, dude.
yeah.
Look like a fucking Lord of the Rings character or some shit. You know?
I will look like a
Looks
Lord of the
cool.
Rings character. All right, it is. Man, handlebar mustache, shaved. Like oh god. Also, now that I know I can grow something like this, have you ever seen? There's like this one YouTuber. I don't know what he does. He has the bald head and a mustache is a fucking power move, okay? Or just like a bald head and a beard. I love that shit. It makes me feel better about my father having a receding hairline. My father doesn't. I don't think I'm gonna go bald in my 20s or 30s. My dad started having thinning hair around his mid 40s.
My dad went bald at 18.
Oh
Completely.
no!
Yeah.
Jesus.
That poor guy.
Why?
Yeah.
Like just
He had like
genetics?
long
Did he
hair
have a-
too. I think it's weird
did he have, like, a
genetics.
condition?
Well, like also my dad, he like doesn't grow a lot of leg hair. Like there are patches that like are just completely bald.
Okay.
So I feel like it might be
The
like
femboy
something.
is what you're
yeah.
saying.
He's also 5'3", so
Oh,
my
no!
God.
How tall are
Dad's a
you?
total femboy.
my parents are both 5'3".
That's pretty-
And
Hey,
I am much
Wait,
taller
how
than
tall
both
are you?
of them.
Oh,
You're adopted, Tash Todd. 100%.
like oh
right?
no! This is how you had to find out, okay?
Yeah. I'm
Like what?
I'm much taller than everyone in my family.
You're totally adopted. Like, where are you really from? You're
Oh,
fucking-
yeah.
like an Eastern European kid originally or something.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Have you ever asked, are you adopted?
I haven't. Maybe I should do a genetics test.
Gotta ask.
Yeah.
Do
See
you
if
have any
there's like
siblings?
random people who start showing up. Like, oh, Ancestry.com thinks you're related to these people in Michigan. Something like
There you
that.
go. Look, if you've got tall siblings, that's maybe not a giveaway. But if you're the only tall person, I mean, I don't know, Taftage.
Like-
unless you hit the fucking Gattaca lottery, you know.
It really depends, you know, especially with your parents. Like my mom's my grandfather's my mom's side's all tall. Like my mom's a very tall lady. I think she's 5'8" or something like that. But my dad's side's all very tiny. I don't think there's a single guy on my dad's side that's taller than 6 foot. But all the men on my mother's side are 6 foot plus, easy. And I feel bad for both my brothers, where it's my youngest brother is about 5'10", and my older brother is 6'1", and I'm 6'3". And I was like, that's right, guys. That's right. I'm just superior. Also, my older brother is completely hairless.
What?
Yes.
What do you mean completely?
So
Like alopecia or
no, as in like so he has very limited leg hair, right? But next to no arm hair, and his chest is like smoother than a baby's ass. And which is weird. Like he doesn't even have like a happy trail. Like it just starts like directly at his pubes. I was like, but for me, I'm like, I have like I have like belly hair and I have some chest hair, and my younger brother's the same way. He's like built the same, like thick leg hair, like happy trail, like chest hair. My older brother just doesn't have like any hair on his torso whatsoever.
Also adopted.
Also
Oh.
adopted. Well, the
No,
thing
but
is, like, I look like my father, like a lot. So that's a point in favor of not being adopted.
That's fair.
True.
Like, it's impossible to say that any of my brothers are adopted because we all look like very aggressively like our parents. My brother and I look aggressively like our dad, and my younger brother looks aggressively like my mom. So
Genetics is just weird sometimes.
It is weird. I've been talking about that with my partner because we both have just like very aggressive genetics, but they're black and Mexican. And we're like, what are our kids gonna look like? Are they gonna be like me in blackface, or are they gonna be like my dad's a ginger, so like, are we gonna have like a ginger fro? Like, I don't. It's gonna be wild. So
Crazy
they'll look good, I assume.
Yeah.
Now my plan is once I start going bald, start just going HRT, go all in, go completely bald, and then start pumping iron. Got to get muscular after bald.
And grow a beard. Bald with a beard.
And a beard, 100%.
Nothing wrong with I've always been like, I think it's a pretty consistent position. This is what we were talking earlier about, like steroid people and like the gym bros. I find it very odd for dudes who are like pro steroid, like be anti-trans. Like, you're using hormones to like make your body look a certain way, like to make you feel better. Like, it feels really odd that you're against it for specific other people, right?
It's like the horses.
I know they get it. I know they get it from horses, but I take that as like, I'm very pro HRT. Like for men, just for men and women as well. You know, like if you're a 45-year-old guy and you have low T and you get like testosterone replacement, like I've heard it's life changing for like a lot of guys, and it just makes your quality of life so much better into your older years. And I think that's a really important thing about quality of life, is just pushing. I think there's going to be a limit, like how old humans can really grow. Live on average. But I think we can start pushing, hopefully, good quality of life up until your 80s or something like that. And I don't mean like slowly falling apart into your 70s and 80s, like actually good, like mobility, moving around. But I feel like a lot of that's also just how you treat your body earlier in life. I know so many people who don't exercise for 40 years and they're like, why do I feel like this? I'm like, I don't know, dude. Like, how many times did you go jogging a week? So
yeah, all of that heart and lung health. And also, like, it's going to be really hard to start jogging if you haven't done it all your life. For like, obviously health reasons, but also like bones. Like, jogging is hard on your bones, and you got to build up that strength.
Yeah, that's why I always. Sorry, go ahead.
I worked with a guy who was he was an Asian gentleman, and you know, if I had to peg him, I'd say he's 62. That's about where I would have pegged him. And then someone mentioned, they're like, oh yeah, Mr. Hanz is like, he's like 85 years old. I'm like, there's no fucking way that man who works 12 hours a day, every day, and looks the way he does is 85 years old. He's like, no, look him up. You can Google him. Like, he's a professor. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. Let me Google him, And sure enough, 85 years old. And I saw him one day when I was working. I ran into him in the gym in the morning. It was like 6 in the morning. I was like, oh, what are you doing here? And he's like, oh yeah, I work out every day, every morning before work, before my 12-hour shift. I work out. It's like, holy shit. Why are you still working? Jesus Christ, man.
Some people just
retire. Enjoy yourself.
No, he's doing. Some people like the work. Right? Some people really never want to retire. Like, it's very. This happens to me whenever if I take a vacation longer than 2 weeks, I start going crazy because I'm not doing anything. And that's part of why I took up streaming. Is what my job was pretty slow. And now that my job is like harder again, like I don't really feel the need to stream as much. But streaming was just an outlet for me to not go insane because I was producing something. Because I've been destroyed by the capitalist work ethic. Sorry, the Protestant work ethic. All right, I must produce, or I am not a man. I have to do something for society. Okay, it's important for me.
It's good. Striving.
Yeah, I like.
Really been indoctrinated.
Hey, I'm not.
It's good. You are the people who make the world go round. It's okay.
I like working. Right. I'm a servant first. A man second. I live to serve. All right. Every person. That's
so based.
That's why.
Stockholm syndrome.
That's why I'm a police officer. Okay. Like, sir,
Live
ma'am,
to
is
serve.
ma'am, is this man bothering you? You know, do I have to set this
Is
boy
this
straight?
young child with a lemonade stand ruining your neighborhood?
Like,
We need to
no,
crack
it's not
down on this.
time for aggressive zoning laws. Like,
Yeah.
let's just.
Do you have a business license for that?
There was like this feel good story about like this like 11-year-old who sold their lemonade recipe to Whole Foods for 11 million or something. Like,
That's
I
wild.
know. Good for her.
Yeah,
So
good for that kid.
Yeah, that's another Elon Musk in the making. All right, just
So
they know how to
true.
grow. It was so funny the way they described it. Like they were like they had a recipe from their grandma from the 1940s, and then they took that and made it their own, and they even added honey. I'm like, can you imagine being a fucking 12-year-old? You're like, I'm gonna add honey to this old ass lemonade, and then 3 years later, you're selling it for millions of dollars. This is bullshit. Okay, there's gotta be something behind that. The kid's parents gotta be like hella rich. And that always makes me so frustrated. Is stories about go-getters or startup people, and they always neglect that they had a shit ton of startup capital behind them. That always makes me so mad because it ruins the story for me. You know, they're not just like a kid like with a lemonade stand. It turns out they, their parents bought them like 3 starting locations. You know what I mean? And they just did their own, and they managed it. And it was just, oh gosh, it takes the fun out of it for me.
I mean, that's true of like
for,
almost
chemical
every
engineers.
hyper successful person. Like,
I know.
if you're going to be a billionaire, like $1 billion is such an insane amount of money. You need to be lucky in some way, right? Like, you need to be lucky and probably also willing to work extraordinary hours all the time. But it's like, you can't have one or the other. You have to have both.
Yeah, because I've known so many hardworking people that like just don't have the startup capital, and like they do well for themselves, right? I would probably put myself in that category where it's like, I've been a hardworking guy. My parents raised me right. Like I got access to like the good schools and good education. But if I ever started a business, which I really don't want to do, but if I did, there's no fucking money for me to do that. So it's like, if I start something, it'd be like a passion project, and I have to like do all the like the crowdfunding and stuff myself, and it just, man. I wonder what it's like to be able to ask your parents like, yo, mom and dad, can I have like $200,000 to start my business? And they just like,
And they're
whatever
like, sure.
you need, sweetie. Like, fuck me. Like, it's just different worlds. Okay.
Yeah, it's insane.
There's gotta be some kind of like fun.
Although just sell drugs illicitly to build your startup capital and then do a legitimate business.
I actually read something about this where it was the average drug dealer, so like the street level people, they make less than minimum wage. They don't actually make that much money selling drugs.
What?
It's only when you get into the middle management of like the organizations that you start doing more than just breaking even.
Drug dealers like, I'm hoping I can break into middle management.
Yeah. Hey, all right.
Fucking street.
I'm working on my executive skills right now.
Yeah. I think I'll go back for an MBA. Maybe the gang will promote me.
This will look great on my CV.
Can you imagine something like, I sell drugs, I have a master's degree, I have an operation of 12 people working under me? I mean, if you had some... I mean, how different is selling drugs aside from increased security, costs and less ability to advertise? You know what I mean? I feel
it's a private business.
Yeah.
So
as a libertarian...
Probably a lot easier to keep your customers around, right?
True.
Because they're drug addicts.
Because they're dependent.
I mean, fuck.
I mean, you have product that they want, all right? That's capitalism, Econo Boy. Your name is Econo Boy. How do you not understand? You have a supply, you're meeting a demand, okay? You might have created that demand by giving drugs to 12-year-olds, but...
That should go in the GDP, Econo Boy. You're creating a lot of consumers who are willing to spend lots.
Do we add drug sales to our GDP?
We don't.
Shadow
money.
Oh, cringe, all right? We need to tap.
Just become a drug dealer, Hans. Though it's just
I don't want to be a
drug business.
Hey, you really think I could be a drug dealer or go undercover as a drug dealer looking like this?
You could. You're like the guy that would, you.
Depends on where you are.
Heroin. You know.
I don't even know if it's like a where I am kind of thing. I feel like most kids would look at me. They're like, "This is like a reasonably built man with a mustache." They're like, this guy's fucking. He's a cop. Like there's like people look. You're not.
You have cop energy.
That's what I'm saying. You'd get away with it. You'd make millions.
Ooh, millions.
Ooh.
I just told. How would a single street dealer make millions selling drugs at Conway? Tell me. Like, I feel like you've been
You'd have
thinking
to
about this for a
expand
while.
operations, obviously.
Okay, like, well,
Fuck.
who with who? With who? Like, give me like a lowdown. How would you build this operation, right?
Bring people in. Okay, you start selling drugs on the street, build a little bit, start recruiting people to sell drugs for you.
How would you
know?
recruit? How would you go about recruiting people for my drug operation? All right, go
Fucking
ahead.
Craigslist, dude. Easy.
Craigslist.
Yeah.
That's very secure. Yeah.
No
Need people to move some product for me. That's all the ad says.
product.
There you go. Nothing illegal about recruiting people to sell product, is there? No, there not
I mean, I probably should go to prison because I'm either a drug dealer or I'm trying to get people into multi-level marketing. So yes.
I mean, probably do people who are already buying from you, right?
That's fair.
You get to know
them.
No,
but then I know that like they'd get high off their own supply. I can never trust them.
Well, you
with
don't
drugs.
give them like a ton of responsibility, but like that's your entry point.
Yeah. I would have. Aptosh and I have this shit figured out.
Yeah.
Hans.
No.
My mother used to sell drugs.
All right.
That's what she did too. Yeah, she had a grow operation before it was legal.
Oh,
in her attic.
Cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I would have a rule. Okay, if I sold drugs or my team sold drugs, no one's allowed to do the drugs if you're selling. Okay,
Mhm.
I'm straight edge evil.
Oh, you think that's
right?
unique, Hans? Every drug dealer probably has that.
No,
rule. Come on.
Nah. I would be real about it. I was like, don't sell to kids. Okay, I'd be like a good drug dealer, right? I'd be like, only sell to adults.
Don't sell to kids.
They've already made their choice. So,
yeah,
that's
fair. You know, you could be like the drug dealer that's like, oh, in addition to this fentanyl, we'll sell you like a 2-for-1. Is it called Narcolan? The shit that like stops fentanyl overdoses.
Yeah,
responsible drug dealer.
I think that's important. Okay.
Yeah. The socially conscious drug dealer.
Right.
Hey,
Harkir.
Selling the disease and the cure.
Hey, all right. Like that's a good business model. Okay.
No, there was a guy who he made. This was look. This is a real news story. He made over $100 million by just sending fake invoices to big tech companies, and they would just pay them. He would send like, "Hey, I provided consulting services, $3,000," and then they would just pay him.
That's amazing.
I heard this news story, and I was talking to my boss, and I was like, I don't understand what he did that was illegal. Like, what did he do that was wrong? Because he just sent them bills for like, and they paid them. Like, they gave him the money, right? And he's like, well, it's fraud. We're like, okay.
It's fraud. That is fraud.
Just a little bit of fraud.
Fucking fraud. Okay. Well, I'm just saying, like, what number one. Okay, here's the thing. Number one.
Does that go in GDP?
I'm shocked that this guy kept like. Imagine doing this and making $55 million, and then thinking, you know what, I'm gonna keep going. Like, that's crazy. Number one. Number two.
This guy hustles, okay? Sigma grind state. You just don't understand economy. That's why you're never gonna make it in the drug trade, okay?
Number two, it's like, okay, well, how vague could you make? Because for instance, if I sent like, I don't know, let's say that I sent Facebook like an invoice. Oh yeah, Econoboy Consulting Services, and then in the inline it says, yeah, I just want like money from Facebook. But like the guy doing accounts payable doesn't like read that and just pays me the money. I feel like I haven't done anything wrong. Like, I just asked for like, just give me $3,000, and they gave it to me. Like,
or if you have a line in there that's like explicitly saying this is not real, and then the person just like skims over that like one line,
like,
and then you go to court and you're like, the line was right here. Like, don't make it like small text or anything, because like if they throw it away, no loss. But like, distribute enough of them. Eventually, someone's going to pay you.
The asterisk said, no services provided, simply wanted free money.
Right.
Like,
this is a donation.
I mean, who reads terms of service? I think it could work.
Eventually, someone's not going to read the terms of service. It's the law of large numbers you're betting on.
Yeah.
That was this guy's whole like model, was just like, oh yeah, like the accounts payable person is just going to pay whatever I send to them. And they did. Like, for hundreds of millions of dollars.
But the thing is, like, he didn't make the disclaimer. You need the disclaimer, otherwise it is fraud. Otherwise, it's just
he made it. He was flying closer to the sun. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But perhaps he's the best of us.
Yeah.
He was the best of us.
All right. I really appreciate this talk, guys.
I'm
not trying to cut the show. We should do this again. We have a podcast called
yeah, exactly. A like, weekly thing.
Yeah. Whitest dealers you know. You know? Like, just And then
Listen, we've got brown girlfriends, okay? We've got the cred, me and
we
Akana boy.
we hey, I also have a brown girl.
Oh my
I
god.
have brown
Partner.
girlfriends. There you go.
I didn't mean to. Yeah, them. Not trying to misgender.
We're such cool white people, right?
We are the coolest fucking white
That's true.
people. Like, oh yeah,
We're down.
we are the white people in the in Hidden Figures who like, you know, like the less racist white person who punches the racist white person because like the studio won't let the black person punch the white person for some reason because it doesn't test well, so their non-racist white friend gets to punch them instead. Right? We're allies. Okay.
So true.
Yeah.
I didn't know Top Taj's girlfriend was Daisy. We
Okay.
gotta do that double date.
Different, not the same kind of brown, okay?
Oh wow!
Jesus.
Oh, what kind of brown are we talking about?
Just grouping all the brown people together.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it sounds pretty racist to me. Like, what do you mean, you people?
I didn't say you people.
No,
No. This is terrible.
it's like
The podcast is already falling apart.
Conservative exposed as racist. Can't even explain what they mean by brown people. Interesting. Mostly, I have to
Listen, BIPOC, all right? A lot of people fall in that category. I think it's racist for you to assume that they're all the same kind, okay? There's a lot of different shades in that rainbow.
What was that? There was actually like that really funny line from Blue Hawk and the Boys where he was like, you know, it's actually racist to accuse someone of being racist. I love it. That actually really fucking.
That was funny.
It's like.
Because it is like the most boomer conservative thing. To be like, actually, you're racist.
It's like against me, because that's just. Like, why would you just assume I hate you because of your race? That's pretty racist of you to assume.
What, just because I'm a white guy?
Like, not just
true.
like. Yeah, Akana boy. How? I was gonna say last thing, but I actually do have to go. I got a text that was just pay attention to me. I was like. I got you, baby. I'm coming. So,
what's your question, Hans? Make it quick.
No.
Oh, you're gonna go right now. No question. You're gonna leave us.
No, I have a question. Okay, if you had to fight either one horse-sized duck or 20 duck-sized horses, who would you pick?
So I've heard because of the cube square law, you'd always pick the one horse-sized duck because it would collapse in on itself.
No, like if it could survive, okay? Like you actually have to fight an angry.
Yeah, it is like titanium enhanced bones.
Yeah.
Okay, so if that's the case, 20 duck-sized horses, like I would fuck up quite a number of duck-sized animals. Like I'm just saying, like. Seriously, like fighting ducks, like how many ducks would it take to kill a human? Like way more than 20, right?
Probably. I would fuck up a duck. But like, I think birds in general just have like sort of brittle bones. I guess though ducks are like land-based birds.
They've got like the hollow bones, right?
Right.
You can just you just yeet them basically.
And like humans are really good at doing like blunt damage. So like, I feel like humans have a natural like good matchup against birds.
Yeah.
That's
it's like opinion. How many 5-year-olds could you take in a fight? Like a lot. Right?
They're not smart. They can't coordinate. You turn them against each other.
I would say it's more actually some birds, yes. I was actually banking on because geese are terrifying. Actually, I read somewhere that like a goose like can flap its wings hard enough to like actually like break bones, like break like.
Oh my god, that's goose propaganda from Big Goose.
No, like
no fucking way. That's
imagine
true.
like a big goose. It could fuck you, but like tiny horses, right? Like the dangerous part of a horse is that
like an airplane turbine can't break your bones if you stand in front of it. Like there's no way a goose can.
What do you know? 1 second. No,
I think he means like they hit you. Yeah, not like the Air Force.
You think I'm
that's what I thought you meant.
Like elemental damage? Accountable?
Yeah, I thought you were like thinking the Flash from the Justice League cartoons. Like
they like cause you to like float upwards. Yeah. You're not allowed to have like an umbrella around geese.
What are you? Like he thought he was so smart too. He was like, "Fucking idiot! Geese don't even do anything."
Way that's true.
Like, oh my! I'm googling this right now. Right, I have to finish this. Okay. All right.
Yeah, a goose can just pimp smack you and knock you out.
You're about to get destroyed by. All right. Can
I can't believe it.
Can a goose break your arm.
I've seen so many videos of people grabbing geese by the neck and just throwing them into the pond.
Exactly.
There's no way.
Just grab their neck.
Let's see. If you get too close, a goose may attack to defend itself. Most goose attacks on humans result in minor or no injuries, but severe injuries can happen. Goose attacks have resulted in emotional distress, head trauma, and broken bones.
Emotional distress.
I mean, if you get your ass kicked by a goose, you're probably feeling pretty shitty about it.
I didn't get my ass kicked, but I sure as hell needed to see a therapist afterwards. Like, what the fuck? Anyway, all right. That's like one of the symptoms of getting like the wrong blood transfused into your body is an impending sense of doom. That's one of the symptoms.
Wait,
like
actually,
if you're type like O and you get if you're type O and you get like type A blood infused into you, you'll have an impending sense of doom. That's one of the symptoms.
That's wild. I'd love to know really like the psychology behind that.
Is that like, can you like naturally feel like, what if they don't tell you about it? Is it like
you'll just feel like you have the doom? It'll be like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? Like,
well, isn't that true with like heart attacks too, where people have like impending sense of doom? It's like definitely a symptom of other things.
Yeah.
All right, Hans. We'll have fun with you're going hanging out with your partner or something. What's happening?
Well, they're currently at a pride parade. But like they're sending me like videos and photos, and they're like, "Tell me I'm pretty." And I'm like, "You are pretty," but like I struggle to I don't want to neglect you guys either. I know I have a problem with communication where if I'm talking to somebody, it's hard for me to carry on like another conversation in text and give both the conversations like the justice they deserve. And also like as a streamer, right? I don't want to be on my phone like trying to listen to you guys and then also texting at the same time. So try to then also have to check. I promised my brothers I'd play video games with them later. And later meeting about 5, so they're probably like, Hans, where the fuck are you?
Yeah, I'll probably head out too. I think it's a good time.
See, Akana boy, you scared us both away, right? We could have.
Sorry.
It only took like 40 minutes. It was a very slow scare off.
Oh yeah, like I mean,
very slow. All right, you guys just raid into me, and then I'll raid into.
Are you even streaming?
Are you on Twitch?
Yeah, dude.
Wait, I thought you were only on YouTube.
Yeah, I thought you were only on YouTube too.
I always dual stream.
Man, okay. I feel bad because that means I just revealed that I don't follow you. Fuck.
Damn.
1 second. All right.
I don't have as many viewers as I did.
Can't believe it.
But I'll still raid.
I'll raid it. I'll raid you too. Well, kind of boy. Like I didn't know you were on Twitch. I legit thought all your shit was on YouTube.
Dual stream master race, dude. It's all about dual streaming.
Master race. Wow. All right, that's just fucking.
I get a lot more viewers on YouTube to be fair. Like I peaked at like 70 today on YouTube, but then like 10 on Twitch. So.
Hey, I peaked at like 20 on Twitch today. Okay, like it's been a good day for me. It's so weird doing mostly gaming, like doing like almost all gaming content now, except for like random conversations that I have. Because when I did like actual political stuff, I was like between like 80 and 100. That was like the average, and then now it's like 12 if I'm lucky. Because people only came like to have like certain views paired to them. I just find that I think it's funny, but it's like I can maintain that level of stuff. Especially because so much political react content is so fucking long to react to, and I just can't afford to stream like that.
Short Fat Otaku just said, "Do you want me to raid?" He's like, "Do you want me to raid all my hate watchers to you?" I said, "Bring it on."
Do it.
Take the challenge. All right, I'm gonna head out, guys. But
see you guys.
It was lovely talking.
It's good talking. See ya.
Bye.
Okay, go show Akana Boy some love. It's really great. Big takes.